is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads, wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. We've had their partnership manager and training specialist Jefferson Mason and marketing manager Nick Bartlett on the show in the past, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing for the game of basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Beyond efficient reps, Dr. Dish provides training expertise and versatility designed to develop complete players. The new Dr. Dish CT machine has further revolutionized basketball training with over 150 plus on-demand individual and team workouts from some of the best coaches and trainers in the game. These workouts include video instruction and combine game-like shooting drills with ball handling, conditioning, and agility drills. Along with workouts, the Dr. Dish training management system also provides stat tracking and analytics to track progress and ensure accountability. These are just a few reasons why top programs like Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida, Baylor, and countless others are upgrading to Dr. Dish. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com. Follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And make sure you mention the Hoopheads podcast to get $300 off your next Dr. Dish purchase. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get out and get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast NBA preview extravaganza. We've teamed up with podcasters from every NBA city to do a deep dive into each team, recapping last season, discussing their key off-season roster moves, the most intriguing storylines, best case, worst case scenarios. Plus, each of our guests weigh in with a prediction for their team's regular season record and how far they'll advance in the playoffs or not next spring.
We think you'll love hearing from these experts around the league about the teams they cover day in and day out. We'll put out 6 episodes broken down by division over the course of 6 days from October 14th through the 19th, leading up to opening night on October 22nd.
Jason and I will weigh in with our own thoughts on the coming season on the final episode of the Hoopheads Pod Preview Extravaganza that will drop on Monday, October 21st. We know you're going to love hearing from this great lineup of podcasters from around the NBA. This episode covers the NBA's Atlantic Division, the Celtics, Knicks, Nets, Sixers, and Raptors. The Boston Celtics with Jackson Bauer from the Celtics Reddit Podcast. All right, we're going to welcome into the podcast to talk some Boston Celtics basketball, Jackson Bauer from the Celtic Reddit Podcast. Jackson, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. I love talking Celtics. I love talking ball, so this is a real treat for me. Thank you.
All right, well, we're glad to have you to talk some Celtics basketball. Let's go backwards in time to last season and talk a little bit about what was
Can we not?
a rather strange, yeah, exactly, a rather strange, to say the least, Celtics season, especially considering how high the expectations were coming into last year. So talk a little bit about what went wrong, and then obviously we'll get into how they tried to make it right in this offseason.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, but it was the expectations, I think, that ultimately killed us. And I think in part of that was the playoff run in 2018 when we had no Hayward, we had no Kyrie. So our expectations were just plummeted after that. And then we saw this amazing basketball from Tatum, Brown, Rozier, Marcus Smart, etc. And we thought, well, if we can get Kyrie fully healthy and a Gordon Hayward back into this picture, then why can't we be contenders? So that's the mentality that at least I had, and I think a lot of fans had going into the season. And it was painfully apparent by about the 20 game mark. I think we started 10-10, but it just was not, something wasn't right. And I think since in the fallout of Kyrie leaving, the popular opinion seems to be it was his ego, his mood, his just overall presence seemed to stifle the overall development of the team. I think that's probably true. I don't know. I don't think it's exclusively true. There was probably other factors at play there, but look, it just did not work. It wasn't a disaster of a season, like by all means. I don't think 49-33 is the worst thing, considering, some fans haven't seen their team make the playoffs in years and years. But it just, there were so many moments where you thought it was getting better, and then it just went back to the same predictable, dreary just rotten sort of vibe around the place, and it ended pretty, as you would expect it, a pretty meek defeat at the hands of the Bucks. And I think everyone breathed a sigh of relief when that was over, because we could start looking forward to the future and get a fresh start.
So the fresh start comes in the form of replacing Kyrie, who goes to Brooklyn, with Kemba Walker. What's the vibe around the team, how Kemba's going to fit in, what it's going to look like? He had 4 guys that got a chance to play on Team USA, and obviously that didn't turn out as well as those 4 and everybody else would have hoped in the World Cup. But they did get a chance to play together, build at least a little bit of camaraderie and chemistry. So what's the feeling coming into training camp with Kemba Walker and what that's going to look like with these guys?
I think just having the personality change, and again, I obviously don't know Kyrie Irving personally. Like, this could be false, it could be true, but it seems that Kemba's temperament and the kind of guy that he is going to fit a lot better with this team. And I think, like, just to touch briefly on like Brad Stevens, he's an excellent coach, but it seems to be that, like, when you have that like one superstar, that one guy that's almost that like really the team goes on, lives and dies by. When we had Kyrie, being somewhat disruptive, I think like his schemes and his coaching seem to suffer from that. Getting Kemba in there, I think he's more team orientated. I think it's just going to be a more pleasant experience. And I think, that won't translate to results directly, but I think having a more optimistic and, united team together is going to, do this team a lot of good. There's a lot of, like I said, there's replacing Kyrie with Kemba. Like, it's not quite like for like. I don't think Kemba really has that superstar pedigree as of yet, but in terms of the stats, like, they're more or less, identical, at least from last year. So look, as long as he can fit into the team and he can distribute and he can score when he needs to, then I don't think we'll miss Kyrie too much.
So when you look at Kemba Walker coming in, I think the key, and I think this is where there was that disconnect with Kyrie, is everybody expected after the run to the Eastern Conference Finals the year before, everybody really expected, especially Jason Tatum, to really take that huge step forward. And last year, that just really didn't happen. He kind of had a similar year to the year before, or maybe even a little bit worse. And people really thought that he was going to take off and hit that next level. So if you look at him and Jaylen Brown are obviously the 2 cornerstones moving forward, that you got to figure out where those guys fit and what their ultimate ceiling is going to be. So how do you see them fitting with Kemba Walker in terms of personality and just be out on the floor working together in the offense?
Yeah, well, I'm actually lucky enough to have just seen my first Celtics preseason game about an hour and a half ago. And even though they didn't play a lot of minutes, I could tell Kemba it appeared that his priority or his approach to the game was to get everyone else involved. Tatum had a fantastic showing the 20 minutes or so that he played. I think he had like 20 points and shot pretty well from the field. But Kemba was, distributing. He was looking to get other guys involved before finding his own shot. So I think if he continues to, kind of play in that mold, then obviously there will be games where he will explode. I think he started last season like absurdly well. He was averaging like 36 or something along that. Anyway, we won't need that from him so much. But I think if he can get the team going and he can get particularly Tatum involved, and Tatum can I don't think he has to have a true breakout season this year to really, contribute to the team. But if he can just, just solid improvements here and there, better shot selection, getting to the line more, things of that nature. I think if we can just slowly start to get that going, then I think it's going to be a decent season.
What about Gordon Hayward? What's the buzz on him coming into this year in terms of health? What do they expect? What does Boston expect from him in terms of getting back to where he was in his last year in Utah? They think he's going to get close, or is he still struggling?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of people last year were quick to write him off, saying that, he's never going to come back and be the same as he was. I was never of that camp. I thought he needs a full uninterrupted preseason and some experience, just some games under his belt to shake off whatever cobwebs or mental hangups he might have had coming off the injury. But like, again, based off of one preseason game and like 15 minutes of performing, he looked great. He was getting to the rim. He was aggressive. He didn't look to be, hesitating. The playmaking was good. The passing was good. The scoring was good. Still a long way to go, but I think everyone is expecting him to maybe not quite be like Utah peak Utah Gordon Hayward, but if he can just come in and be like a decent playmaker, can contribute with points, then it's going to be a world of good. I still think overall, like you take everyone in this team together, I still think he's the X factor. I think if you get Gordon Hayward going and he can perform to a level similar to that of the Utah Gordon Hayward, then the Celtics are going to be good.
I was going to make that exact same point. That was going to be my next question for you.
Yeah.
I really think he's the guy that has the biggest variance, just because when he's at his peak, he can be very, 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 very good. And then obviously last year, he never got to that point. He had showed some signs occasionally, but he never quite got there. And I think if he could get there, that would really, really make a big difference. In your mind, Jackson, what's the biggest or best storyline going into the season? What's the one or two things that you're really going to be looking for as you try to figure out what this team's going to be all about?
The reality that I hope comes to fruition the most is that Taco Fall turns into like a Giannis like just phenom and just blocks everyone.
That block he had tonight was pretty awesome. That was awesome.
It was amazing, yeah, and you can just tell how many people in Boston, or just Celtics fans in general, just are absolutely enamored with the guy. As soon as he checked in, it was like the biggest ovation I've heard probably since the playoffs 2 years ago. So if Taco Fall can become first of all, he's got to get a contract with the actual team. I don't think he's officially a player, doesn't have a two-way contract yet or anything of that session. Anyway, if he can turn into something amazing, then that's what I would want to happen first and foremost. But I think just going back to the chemistry that we touched on and just the overall unity of the team, I just kind of want to have this team to have fun. Like even if we finish with an identical record of 49-33 as we did last year, I just want to enjoy watching the Celtics. I want to see, good team basketball. I want to see determination. I want to see some heart. I don't want, that sort of just neither here nor there, just rotten sort of feeling it was at times watching them last season. So I just want to kind of banish that bad feeling from the past, and just, even if like we don't achieve much this year, I just want to see some signs that this team as a unit is moving in the right direction. And whether that translates to great results or just average results, I'm not really that bothered. I just want to feel like the team is together and really playing together.
Makes a ton of sense. What do you think is going to happen at the center position opening night? Which of the guys you think Cantor? Do you think Theis? Do you think it's going to be Robert Williams? Who's going to start at center?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think we haven't touched on losing Al Horford, and just quickly, I think he's going to be a bigger loss to us than Kyrie was, because like I said, we got Kemba is like almost like a like-for-like replacement to a degree, but Horford's role and Horford's responsibilities on both ends of the floor is going to have to be distributed amongst multiple players now. Now that could work well. It might be better for the team as a whole. It might be detrimental, because then we just don't have that one guy who is, the leader, the overall defensive presence, decent on the offensive end and whatnot. So whoever kind of is the best fit for the team that's on there at the time, it's hard to say, because Cantor, great at rebounding, decent scoring down low, defensive liability seems to be the popular consensus there. We just started Robert Williams in this game against Charlotte a couple of hours ago. Didn't really impress me. I'm a big Robert Williams fan. I really think he can be something special. He's just got to get more experience. He's just got to defensively, he's got to pick up his game more. So I feel like it's going to be Cantor. It might be Robert Williams. It could be a total shock. We may even see Grant Williams, and the dude is only 6'7". He's not a center at all. He's probably more of a power forward or whatnot. But if they want to go small, from what I saw of him today and what I saw in the summer league, he is very competent. Particularly you wouldn't guess he's such a good, not necessarily rim protector, but just defense in the paint. He's very competent at that. So it's a big mystery to me, man. I think if I had to put my money on someone, it would probably be Cantor, but man, we shall see.
Just won't be during the playoffs, because he can't eat as much food in the playoffs. So
that's true.
Gotta watch out.
Taco will be the same, I think. Yeah. So we will have to keep an eye on that.
That's it. All right. What's your best case, worst case scenario for the Celtics season? Start with the worst case and then give us the best case.
Worst case. Okay, let's see. Gordon Hayward is more of the same as he was last year. That Tatum breakout or that Tatum progression never comes. It's just average basketball. Obviously, we won't touch on injuries. Obviously, injuries to key players would be awful. But just seeing the likes of like the Sixers, start to streak ahead of us, I don't think we're on Milwaukee's level at this point either. So I feel like there's a bunch of teams that could really overtake us here. Brooklyn as well, particularly. So I think worst case scenario, I don't see us missing the playoffs, but I could see us being quite a low seed. And if we get a bad matchup in the first round, we could get bounced straight away, which is not really the worst case scenario, so to speak. But I think as far as a realistically poor scenario overall for the Celtics would be, I think it would probably be like a 7th or an 8th seed.
For sure. Understood. Unless, again, barring major injury, but I think you're right in terms of if everybody stays healthy and just there are some minor issues or players don't play up to their potential. I think you're probably right. What about the best case scenario?
I think best case scenario that this team becomes just a total offensive weapon on like just about all facets. Like Jason Tatum, from what I saw today, looked very good. Same with Hayward. Brown's in a contract year and he's shaved his iconic flat top that so many Celtics fans love and cherish so much. But I think if we're just going to be like purely aesthetic, maybe that change will do him a world of good, and he can become the kind of all round, maybe sort of Jimmy Butler prototypical sort of player. Basically, I don't think the defense is going to get any better, but I do think that this team is capable of putting up a lot of points every night. So, man, even if we're like winning most games like 130 to 125 or something like that, I just want to see free-flowing, good offensive basketball that's just entertaining, really. So I think realistically, our ceiling, I can't see us getting the 1 or 2 seed realistically. I think maybe a 3rd seed. And then if we can get some of that like mojo, some of that grit, determination, and just drive that we had in the playoffs two years ago, then I don't think the East Conference Finals is definitely realistic.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think Milwaukee, at least on paper, Milwaukee and Philly are probably the 2 favorites coming out of the East. And then I think you throw Boston into that mix of, 3 or 4 teams that are right behind there, where if things break right, who knows, they get a favorable matchup or somebody gets hurt in the playoffs. Who knows, maybe they do make an Eastern Conference Finals. What do you see realistically, in your own opinion, between those worst case and best case scenarios? Where do you see them finishing come mid-April next year when the regular season ends? And then what do you see them doing in the playoffs?
I think we're going to have more or less a similar record to what we did last year, but I think it's just going to be a more enjoyable. It's going to feel like 10 wins more rather than
right.
Maybe 1. I'm going to hang my hat and saying we'll have a 50-32 record and probably finish as, I'll say the 3rd seed. I'll be optimistic and say the 3rd seed. Then it just comes down to our matchups there. Like I would love to see a Boston-Brooklyn series, Kyrie taking on the Celtics and us trying to get one back over Kyrie. That would just write itself. I would love to see that.
You want to see that if Kevin Durant doesn't somehow miraculously play, though, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. As long as he stays on the sidelines, we'll be fine. Because I think the season after that, obviously that's a long time in the future. The disparity is going to be a bit greater. But I think personally it's going to be a similar season to last year, but it's going to feel a lot better. We're going to feel like a better team, even if the results don't necessarily translate, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. I think better chemistry. It's just going to be a team that what I hear you hoping for is that they're going to be more enjoyable to watch. It seemed like last year there was so much drama around Kyrie, whether that was in-game, post-game, in the media, that it just didn't seem like that team was having too much fun. And then obviously it ended with the series against Milwaukee, where it kind of went out with a whimper after winning game 1, and then things just kind of fell apart from there. And I think that what I hear you saying is if the team is fun to watch and they're getting along and they have good chemistry, that's going to feel like 10 more wins, even if it doesn't necessarily translate. Which team of Milwaukee or Philly do you think come next year in the playoffs, which team do you think the Celtics would have a better chance of upsetting if you had to pick one of those two, if it ends up that they match up with one of those teams at some point in the playoffs?
I've been on the record on the Celtics Reddit podcast saying many times that Philadelphia has just never scared me at all. Like, I don't know what it is about like just that team, but every time we play them, I just feel like we're going to win. I think that's different this year with the Horford acquisition, and I do think Ben Simmons is poised to have a massive breakout sooner or later, and then that could push them ahead of us. So I'm probably going to say Philly is the team I don't want to see at this point. Milwaukee, I think, even though Giannis can still get better and can still be like the absolute behemoth that he is, I think losing Brogdon is a loss for them. I don't know if they're going to be as good because they had a very, very good season last year record-wise. I don't think they're going to be able to live back up to that. So I think they might be slightly more vulnerable this year than they were last. I'm still going to put Philly ahead as the biggest threat, or the team that I would probably rather see the latest in the postseason anyway.
Jackson, thank you so much for jumping on with us and talking Celtics basketball and for being a part of the Hoopheads NBA pod preview.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you very much, guys.
You got it. All right, Jackson. Thanks, man.
Cheers. Bye.
The Brooklyn Nets with Doug Norrie from the We Got Nets podcast. All right, we're welcoming to the Hoopheads podcast NBA preview tonight, Doug Norrie from the We Got Nets podcast to talk some Brooklyn Nets basketball. Doug, welcome.
Hey, yeah, great to be here. Can't wait to talk about some Brooklyn basketball. Should be a fun season.
Absolutely. There's a lot of new faces, a lot of excitement in Brooklyn, I'm sure, with Kyrie and KD heading there. Let's go back, though, first and talk about last year's Nets season, which was pretty successful, all things being said. There was a lot of development and then got a chance to get into the playoffs. And who knows, if one or two things would have broken a little differently, you could have really made Philly sweat there in that first round.
Yeah, it was. I think they exceeded even their own expectations. I just know they did. I don't think they thought they were going to get there. It's what happens when you don't really embrace tanking, which I think ended up being the correct move, just from a culture standpoint and just like an overall team chemistry standpoint, to just say, look, it doesn't make sense for us to tank. Like, we might as well just play the hand we're dealt and just, go as far as we can. They did get a little lucky. They didn't sneak into the playoffs, but it was pretty close. But all things considered, it was nothing short of just a massive win to get that far with that squad. Really, everyone and to lose LeVert for like half the season too, and still make the playoffs was, that had to have exceeded. It definitely exceeded everyone's expectation, and probably just really actually laid the groundwork for everything else that really happened after that.
I had a chance actually in Chicago last spring to sit down at a junior NBA event and talk to Kenny Atkinson, and he talked to me a whole bunch about just how much the culture had changed since he first got there and when Sean Marks came in, and just the fact that they had put together this roster. He's like, I just really love the guys that we have on this team. And you mentioned, LeVert got hurt last year, but I think there's a lot of thought before he went down with the injury. And then I think heading into this year that when you look around the league, that maybe he's the third guy in that pecking order once Durant comes in. And we've had Joe Harris's dad as kind of a friend of the podcast. We've had him on a couple times, so we kind of followed Joe Jr.'s career pretty closely. So I think there's some nice pieces there that had some success last year on their own, and now you bring in Durant, you bring in Kyrie, and obviously I would have to assume that Durant's not going to see the court at all at any point this season, but you bring in Kyrie, and you got to see how those guys fit into that culture that Kenny Atkinson was talking about.
Yeah, so I'm of a lot of minds about this. I'm pretty firmly, I don't want to put the cart before the horse because I'm sure we're going to talk about predictions and stuff. I feel firmly in the camp right now that the Nets do not see this year as any kind of testimonial year for them. I think they're looking already ahead to next year because that's when Durant comes back. It's been said that Durant's not going to play this year. I think that's pretty firm. Marks came out and said that. Atkinson came out and said that. I don't know if Durant will push the envelope. Like, this guy has always kind of wanted to play and wanted to come back early. So I think he says it now because he knows he can't. But I'm a little worried that there's going to be a point later in the season, like let's say March, somewhere around those lines, where he feels good and he feels like he wants to play. And so maybe at that point, there's some, not animosity, but maybe disagreement about that. So I'm holding out hope that doesn't get to that point, but I can see it happening. But all things considered, I think that the piece, look, you're bringing Kyrie and KD, there's nothing short of just an absolute landslide victory in terms of the offseason. I do think that Nets probably had to temper their expectations, Nets fans, have to temper their expectations a little bit on this season's outcomes, which we can probably get into, but I have some specific thoughts about that. But going into it as a Nets fan, the difference between last year and this year is just like, you put yourselves absolutely on the map with superstars. And in the current NBA, That's basically where you have to be if you want to be considered anything close to a title contender.
For sure. At what point during, I guess, the end of the season, as we headed into the off season, at what point did you start hearing the possibility that Kyrie and Durant were going to come? Because it seemed like, at least from a national scale, that really wasn't a story. I don't know that anybody was really talking about, hey, these two guys are going to end up in Brooklyn. At what point did you start to think that could actually become a reality?
So I would say sometime in March. So it's funny. I do another whole NBA podcast, just talking about, the fantasy side of NBA. But sometime around March, I thought to myself, this is when we started the We Got Nets podcast specifically because of this. I was like, I think they're going to come. I don't know exactly what tipped me off onto that. I don't know if I read something or just had this general feel like this was going to be the season. But we basically started the podcast then because
we're getting out on these two guys early.
100%. 100%. So it was. I can't remember the exact line of demarcation where I was like, this is definitely going to happen. I still, even up until that last Sunday, my partner Adam and I were not. My podcasting partner Adam and I were not positive. We thought there was a chance that something was going to happen, and waiting for Woj bombs to take hold. But 2 months before that was when we started laying the groundwork, because I think we felt pretty confident that at least one of them was going to come, if not both. And it was really just more just like a gamble to put our time in and start podcasting about it. So I'm using that as the time, because I know that's definitely when we started the podcast, based on, I think this is going to happen. Let's get rolling on this now, because I think the Nets culture is about to shift in a pretty dramatic way.
All right, so let's take a look at what impact, for this year at least, that Kyrie has on this team. You bring him into sort of an existing ecosystem with guys that played together last year, seem to have a great relationship, seem to have this team camaraderie. And then you look at what happened with Kyrie in Boston last year and how much of it you attribute to Kyrie and his personality, or how much you attribute it to just the general situation in Boston. How do you see, what are you hearing as far as his ability to fit in and really coalesce with this team to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that they're heading in the right direction? Because as you said, the dynamic is going to shift next year when Durant comes back. But this year, Kyrie is probably clearly the best player, or at least the biggest name on this roster. So how do you think that's all going to fit together this year? What are you hearing at this point?
Well, so what you hear is all platitudes and great stuff, because nothing's actually happened. Like, this is the easiest time for everyone to be best friends and get along and best shape of our lives and never play better basketball, and everyone loves each other. So what you hear is all good stuff, and there's no reason to not believe it. Kyrie has an interesting track record, which is going to make probably everyone be on a little pins and needles to start the season. He did get hurt in the first minute of the game in China. The China trip was nothing short of an epic disaster, I think, just like from all standpoints. But and Kyrie gets hurt in the first minute of the first game. So you don't even really get a chance to see, and he didn't play the first preseason game either. You don't get a chance to see really him on the basketball court at all with anybody. So there's no reason to suspect it won't work. But you really don't have anything to lean on at this point. Again, like, he and LeVert practiced. He and Durant practiced a lot over the summer together. He was leading team practices, has said that he was very honest in some of his media stuff about where the rift with Boston started to occur. It occurred sort of around some family stuff. The problem is with Kyrie is that we just have like multiple examples of this stuff at this point, between wanting to leave a pretty, I'm putting it in quotes, nice situation with LeBron in Cleveland, and then going to Boston and kind of having that get submarined as well. There's enough fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of stuff with Kyrie that I probably hold out a little more trepidation than the average Nets fan about Kyrie at this point. And I also don't have any reason to suspect it don't work. He's not too dissimilar from D'Angelo Russell in the sense that they're very on ball. They need to work, top of the key, screen down, get moving downhill kind of stuff. But I believe it's going to work. And I think I'm just a little more bearish on it than the average Nets fan, because just from following the NBA, he's had a weird track record just in terms of getting along with other guys.
He just thinks the earth is flat. It's all good.
And I got to tell you though, I do hold out a piece of my heart for Kyrie, because I was talking to you guys off the air. I used to be a teacher, and he actually went to the district in West Orange, New Jersey, where I used to teach. And so I know guys that coached him growing up, back in middle school. Shout out to Paul Atzma, his middle school coach, because that's just like that was his shining moment, was coaching Kyrie when he was in 8th grade. So there's a piece to me, like just from a personal level, that really I don't know him personally, by the way, but I know enough overlapping people that do know him. So I really want him to succeed. It's nothing about that. I want this thing to fully work on all levels. It's good for us as a podcast. It's good for Brooklyn. It's good for people that I know that know him in New Jersey and all this stuff. And I'm just not dipping my foot totally in the Kyrie's this is all going to work pool just yet.
I really like him. I loved him when he was here in Cleveland. I think he's the perfect second guy to a superstar. I think if he's your best player, then you're not gonna win at the highest level. But
Totally.
when he's your second best player, I could count on one hand the number of guys that I'd rather have taking a big shot at the end of a game other than Kyrie. I mean, he can create shots out of anywhere, and I think that was something that when he was here in Cleveland, he fit so well next to LeBron, because if I look at what LeBron's one weakness is I'm not sure I want LeBron taking that last shot, because chances are it's going to be a 30-foot fadeaway three-pointer.
Yeah.
And so I'd much rather would have had the ball in Kyrie's hands, as was proven in the Game 7 of the title series that we did win in 2016. So I was sad to see him go, because again, I just felt like there was no better second banana to LeBron than Kyrie, and I think that same situation can apply also when Durant comes back. So I think that if he can accept sort of that second banana, or even that 1B to Durant's 1A, then I think there's a lot of positives that can be had. And then you look at the other pieces of the roster that the Nets have, and there's definitely the makings of what can be a title contender during the time, is less, again, provided that you get 95% of what the Durant was, pre-injury, then I think there's some nice things going on here. So if I were a Nets fan, I would be cautiously optimistic that Kyrie was going to figure it out, especially once Durant comes back. I think that those two guys, and clearly they chose to play together, so you hope that they have some off-court chemistry in addition to the on-court chemistry. So it'll be interesting to see how this year goes.
They're both interesting guys for sure. And you have to do this in the NBA. You have to, if you have a chance to get these guys, you just simply don't even hesitate, right? So it's not like, there's no question that this was the correct move to do. Durant is a very different player. I mean, besides just being incredible, he's a very different player than LeBron, as you know that. Like LeBron's just a distributor. LeBron is a distributor in the way that Durant isn't. So again, this is pretty moot for this season, because I don't think it's even going to matter. I think that it's going to. I think Kyrie can basically this year do whatever he wants. They're going to actually need him to do whatever he wants, I think, because there's they have some holes in the roster for sure. So I think he will have a year to be basically just being the man, and the expectations aren't really gonna. There's no title expectations this year, and I think that actually, more than anything, is a very thing for this team, that the expectations are sort of low-ish, because everyone says, well, next year is the year. This is not the year. Let's just see what we have. Let's see what we have, and let's go from there. I think from that point of view, it's really no lose. Like, it's kind of like house money stuff. It's like, well, our max top three player in the year, top three player in the league guy is not playing. Like, what could the expectation possibly be? And when you go into the season like that, I think you can play pretty loose in a way that I'm not sure, like, some of this other stuff's not really going to matter. I don't think.
Here's the question that I have. How long until Durant creates a burner account throwing shade at the rest of the team?
I want to. Well, it's funny you say that, because I want to believe. See, this is where as a fan, I go into this thing with two minds. I like to analyze basketball, and I also like to be a fan. So from an analyzed basketball standpoint, I'm like, well, it's only a matter of time, right? Like, we've seen too many examples of these guys of just not working out. And from a fan standpoint, like drinking the Kool-Aid, I'm like, well, they just learned it all, right? Like, he won't do this. He was already getting into with Knicks fans on Twitter the other day, just like not even from a burner account. Like, he's just kind of just trading back and forth stuff with them when they were talking trash. Like, sometimes you just think he can't help himself, but probably not that long. He probably already has done it, following some of these other accounts, specifically probably some Knicks stuff, because they've been really kind of throwing him shade for not going there overall, and everyone thinks that the Nets are second bananas to the Knicks anyway, even though there's not a lot of evidence at this point besides maybe fan base. So probably not long, and I really hope it doesn't happen.
All right, so the last roster piece that I think is pretty interesting that could end up be an important cog in the team, I think, is Taurean Prince. Can you talk a little bit about how he fits in and what he may be able to bring to the table that maybe they lacked last year?
Well, they didn't lack it, but my only issue with some of the Nets roster moves this year was they were sort of redundant on what they were good at already. And so, their best player basically last year was D'Angelo. Well, not from a win share perspective, but one of their best players was D'Angelo Russell. They replaced him with Kyrie. And one of their other best players was actually DeMarre Carroll last year. Actually, in terms of win shares, Jared Allen was their best player, and they just brought in DeAndre. So these are like some of the weird moves that I didn't totally understand, because they didn't take a linear path toward getting better by taking the pieces that already worked and then continue to add other pieces around it. They sort of swapped out their best pieces with upgrades everywhere else. So this is my long way of saying the Prince signing is really nice. He's shown in the preseason, and he did this last year with Atlanta, that he's an absolute knockdown shooter, especially on catch and shoot threes. So in this offense with Kyrie and with guys that are like Jared Allen and DeAndre too, that can rim run, that I think he's going to see a ton of open looks. He's already seen them in the games in China and he's shooting like 60 or 70% from three. I know that's not sustainable, obviously, but he's a great addition. I wish he didn't come at the expense of some of the other guys they let go. And he's definitely an upgrade, because one of these things you guys know with the NBA, sometimes players on teams, when you play on a team like Atlanta, you don't really have a good clue what these guys can do, because that team's just tanking. The roles are weird. The rotations are a total mess. So Prince was definitely he became a victim of stuff like that, just being on a bad team that's trying to lose. So I think it is a great upgrade. I wish he was there in addition to some of the other pieces they still had. And if you ask them to play the four a lot, which they're going to, I think that's going to probably cause some defensive headaches. But I think they'll probably try to win like in a war of attrition by saying he's going to knock down enough threes and get to the basket enough that they'll win. So again, long answer, but I really like it. I liked it when they did it. And the one thing I could see is it becoming a problem defensively if they feel like they can get away with him at the four for the whole season. I think that might be a problem.
Yeah, I think he's a sneaky good addition to this team. I like the way he fits next to some of the guys that they already have, and I think he's going to play a key role for the Nets this year for sure. All right, in your mind, Doug, what's the most intriguing storyline? What's the one thing that you're going to be watching for this year as you sit down and watch games?
Well, the easiest one we already talked about is Kyrie. Like what happens with Kyrie? Now, he got hurt, and who knows how much the facial fracture, because this is a thing that's happened to him before. So there's been very little news out of China, so it's unclear how severe the injury is. Obviously the most important thing is Kyrie. Like that, I think that goes without saying. After that, I have the big one is LeVert, because LeVert, like you mentioned at the beginning, his ability to sort of be, how good is he? This is one thing we haven't seen yet, because between the injury and they really jacked around his rotations for a long time. Like, didn't even start him at the beginning of the playoffs against the Sixers, and they started him game 3, I think. So they weren't even totally sure, I think, what they were doing with him last year. I think this season for him is going to be a critical one, and I think it's going to be great too, because I think, one, I think he's very, very good. And two, he's going to be given the latitude to just be more of a freewheeling player than he will be when Durant comes back. So I think that the fact that Durant isn't here is going to give the Nets tons of leeway to see what they have with him. And I think that the gains and the returns are going to be awesome. I think he's so good. And it's one of those guys, like, I don't know, the average NBA fan, I know you guys have heard of him, but I think the average NBA fan doesn't see him or doesn't really maybe know who he is or how good he is. And some of that's contextual stuff, like having been hurt. But I think this is going to be sort of a coming out party for LeVert this year, especially if Kyrie misses any time. I think then it's really going to be, the stats will back it up too. But I can't wait to see what he does this season. My other sneaky one, I don't know what you guys think, but you guys are like basketball X's and O's guys. I think that like they have such a size problem. I'm actually mind getting your opinion on this, because you guys, coaching and stuff, probably know a lot more about this than I was wondering if they'd ever think about playing DeAndre Jordan and Jared Allen together, because some of these other teams are so big. The Lakers and the Sixers and even the Pacers. Like I wrote a piece about that in the offseason, wondering if they would ever consider doing this because they're so outside. Did you ever see that happen?
Here's what I'm going to say right now. Anthony Davis is going to keep getting hurt. I saw him he sprained his quote-unquote his thumb. So I really wouldn't worry. I'm getting ahead of myself, but he just seems to always get hurt. So I'm going to worry about that. But I think you could do that. I mean, what's I don't know, how many minutes is DeAndre Jordan really going to be playing to be an effective player at this point in his career?
It's not really all that effective now.
I could see them trying it. I mean, what's the hurt in trying, especially, but I don't know that how effective it would be because, like you said, DeAndre Jordan's kind of, I mean, not very effective as it is. So,
well, see, it's funny you say that because Nets fans don't see it that way. Nets fans, if you spend your time in Nets world and if you go deep into the dark alleys of Brooklyn Nets fandom, which you do when you run like a team-centric podcast, you'll find a lot of people that it's no question in their mind that DeAndre Jordan is a much better player than Jared Allen. I think that's crazy. But the problem is he makes the third most amount of money on the team because they basically brought him as a way to get Kyrie and KD in here. In the eyes of the Nets fans, DeAndre Jordan is just some Nets fans, not all, is a better player than Jared Allen, which I think is incorrect on a lot of different levels, but people see it that way. He's a much bigger name, so sometimes people get attracted to the name over what the actual skill levels are. So I think that's problematic piece number one. Problematic piece number two with DeAndre is that he was brought in specifically sort of to appease Kyrie and KD. Like they basically said, we'll come, but you got to bring this guy in, even though they just did not need this guy at all. They just had Jared Allen. And you really, at this point in the NBA, probably don't want to have too many centers, although some of these teams are big. So I think it actually is going to be something of a question about his playing time. I was hoping we'd see Jared Allen take a few more threes in the preseason, just to see if he can extend the court a little bit, just to keep people honest. He took 2 yesterday and airballed them both, so whoops. But that's that was like the intriguing piece for me, because when you play like a Horford and Embiid lineup or Sabonis and Miles Turner lineup in the East, the Nets with their current roster, if they don't play these guys together, they're completely outside.
My piece on Jared Allen is he could at least make free throws, and you're gonna need that, especially from his position. And then once again, DeAndre Jordan has shown time and time again that free throws are not necessarily his strong suit.
Yeah, so
he improved last. You want to hear something? So I just realized this from the podcast or the thing the other day, the broadcast. He improved last year to like a 70% free throw shooter, but he does this thing where he talks to somebody at the free throw line, but sometimes he's actually talking to someone, but sometimes he's just talking to the air, but it's a way to distract himself. And since he started doing that, he actually starts making free throws. That's the weirdest thing.
He's like Tom Hanks in what's that, Castaway, when he's talking to Wilson.
Exactly.
You got to free up your mind. Free up your mind.
He's got the yips, but he just talks to air, and then he just gets the ball really fast and shoots and makes them. It's the weirdest thing. Anyway, I didn't want my thought is I didn't want them to bring DeAndre. I get why they did it. And I'm trying to think of ways to make the best of a situation that I don't think they should be in. So I don't know. We'll see what happens during the year.
I think that it would be. I think you made a great point there, Doug, about if Jared Allen could step out on the floor at least a little bit and shoot some threes and maybe make people play him a little bit more honestly so they could spread the floor. I think DeAndre Jordan, there's still the fascination with what he was when he was with the Clippers. And, if you watched him for the last season and a half or 2 seasons, he's clearly nowhere near the player that he was prior to that. Now, you could say last year that, he was in a situation where they're going nowhere. He's a veteran. He just doesn't care at that point. And so maybe now he comes to the Brooklyn Nets and he's rejuvenated. I don't necessarily know that's the case. I think you could maybe get away with playing those 2 guys for short stints, possibly against one of those bigger teams where they could find somebody to match up. But DeAndre Jordan isn't guarding anybody out on the floor very well. I don't know that he was even good at it. I don't know that he was very good at that even at his peak. I mean, he was much more of an interior defender and a rebounder than he was a guy that was chasing ball handlers off the pick and roll. So I think it would be challenging to play any extended minutes with those 2 guys. But depending on who you're playing against and who the other 3 guys are that you put around them, could you get away with it in spot minutes? You probably could, but I think the ultimate goal is what I hate to see here would be if I was a Nets fan, what I would worry about is DeAndre Jordan taking developmental minutes away from Jared Allen, especially this year, where, as you said, Doug, it's kind of a house money type situation where what you should be doing is developing guys who are going to help you eventually contend for a title when Durant is back healthy. And I don't know that DeAndre Jordan's the guy I want to put my faith in. I'd rather be developing Jared Allen, at least in my opinion.
100%. And that was, like I said, my only concern. I don't. DeAndre's looked energetic, at least. I think he understands sort of where his career's turned. So I think that's a good news. He's still doing the thing where he pushes his own teammates out of the way for rebounds. He did that twice in China, which is so completely maddening. He did it to Doncic last year, in a video that went viral. Anyway, don't want to make this DeAndre Jordan podcast, but he's kind of like a piece where I get why they did it, and I kind of wish they didn't. So I was just trying to hope and dream on something that probably isn't going to happen with them.
If DeAndre Jordan is the thing you need to get Kyrie and KD, you say, oh, well, I guess I'll have to do it, right?
100% every time. You ask how much, whatever he wants, we'll do it. And they gave him 4 years, so he basically did say that. But yeah, no, it's a no-brainer to have done it. I'm just trying to think on how it works going forward.
All right, Doug, give us the best case, worst case scenario for this Nets season. Why don't we start with the worst case and then we'll end with the best case?
All right, so the worst case is, and Nets fans aren't going to want to hear it, and I kind of get dragged by Nets. The worst case is they don't make the playoffs, and I actually think it's more realistic than people think. This team, if Kyrie hasn't really played a full season in 4 years, and so I think people are sort of forgetting that as well too. Like he's had a lot of injuries, and so if Kyrie doesn't play, this team is really going to struggle over the course of the season. And I think that if he misses something like 15 or 20 games for whatever reason, or especially if the Nets do see this as a building year and they just say, we're going to rest you because we're not going anywhere, any minute they lose out of him this year is really problematic for their win total. So I think it's not off the table. I don't think it's likely, but I think it's more in the discussion than people think that they could just not even make the playoffs. They were barely a 500 team last year, and I get they've upgraded, but they also have $37 million worth of guys sitting on the bench. And if they put another $31 million on the bench with Kyrie for missed time, this team is looking pretty thin. So that's the worst case scenario. I don't think it's likely, and I unfortunately can see different scenarios happening where it becomes much more much more in your face that this team, if they're missing these two guys, it's just kind of an average or below average team.
All right, best case scenario.
Best case scenario is they improve and they are like the 4 seed in the East. I think there's a way that can happen too. I think the East is improved in some ways. I know that Kawhi is not there anymore. And I know that the Celtics sort of shifted some pieces around, and the people are kind of wondering on what they'll be. But I don't love the Heat. People like the Magic. The bottom of the the bottom of the East is still very weak in terms of like the Pistons and the Knicks, Cavs, Hawks. These teams.
Oh man, I was hoping you were going to say the Cavs.
Oh my God!
I'm totally joking. We want to lose. All right, go ahead.
Yeah,
the Wizards could be looking at an all-time bad year, especially if they trade Beal. So there are a lot of wins at the bottom of the East, but there's also some of these teams are just improved enough that I'm worried. So like the Magic, I think I've gotten better. The Heat definitely, I think, got a little better. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think the best case scenario is the 4 seed. I would probably, if I was just going to hedge, I'm going to put them at the 7 seed in the East, and I'm lower than most other Nets fans really want to hear me. So on that thing, so I think I'd land on 7, best case 4, but I think that I think if it's a 6 or 7 seed, I personally would look at this as a massive win again.
All right, so you're saying your prediction, what you think is going to happen is somewhere 6, 7 seed. How many regular season games do they win?
They go 500.
500.
They go 41-41. Yeah, I think so.
All right, and then is there a chance that they can win a playoff series? I think if they're in the number 7 seed, I don't know that you're beating Milwaukee or Philly, but is there a matchup with one of those other sort of middle of the pack Eastern Conference teams where if they could, let's say, get up to a 3, let's say they could get up to a 6, is there one of those other teams that they could possibly upset in a 3-6 matchup? Which team would you most like to see them face in the playoffs?
Boston.
If every team, if their current iterations stay the way they are, I think that any one of those like wing sort of heavy teams, like the Heat, the Celtics, I'm throwing the Magic in there sort of. The Raptors, I think, are still going to actually be pretty good. I know they lost Kawhi, but they still have some pretty good pieces there. I think any of those teams they would match up fine with. It's the big ones like the Bucks and the Sixers specifically. They're really going to struggle with. But I think they'd be in contention in a short series, like max minutes out of Kyrie and max minutes out of LeVert and guys like this, I think and getting Jared Allen as many minutes and Prince knocking down threes, I think they can hang with any one of those teams. It's more of my concern over the course of a long season with those things that I talked about, like injury concerns around Kyrie and just not really going for it all. That's kind of why I'm more bearish on their win total more than anything else. It's not because of their overall talent level. It's just because I think they need to go kind of like balls to the wall to win a lot of games this year with this group. And I just don't think correctly that they're going to be willing to do it. So it's not a talent thing as much as I think they're going to load manage these guys this year. And I think that's where I'm really cutting their wins down.
Yeah, I think that makes sense from their standpoint. As you said, this year is a year where they can kind of take the time to figure out, well, what do we have in these guys? How are we going to develop Karis LeVert? Is he going to become that third piece of a big three, or is he just another guy on the roster? Is Joe Harris going to continue to develop and become even a more valuable player than he was last year? What can you get out of Jared Allen? Is he going to eventually be a guy that can maybe step out on the floor and shoot three? So I think that you're right in the sense that they're not going to want to push Kyrie to the absolute limit of his physical capabilities and have him play 80 games at 38 minutes a game in order just so they can win 45 games instead of 41. I think you're right on track there. And I do think that if you look at the Eastern Conference playoffs, I think there's a clear divide between Philly and Milwaukee and then that next tier of teams. And in that next tier, there's 6 or 7 teams that could probably rightfully claim a piece of that next tier. And I think Brooklyn is definitely one of those teams. And you mix those teams up into a hat, and when you get to the playoffs, who knows who's healthy at that point or what changes have been made at the All-Star, at the trade deadline or off the waiver wire when we get to the buyout season. So I think that Brooklyn has as good a chance as anybody of being in that mix of, getting to the second round. And I think when you get to the second round, I think that's probably the ceiling of where this team can get to this year.
Can I just throw something out there? How crazy would it be if they somehow made it to the Eastern Conference Finals without Kevin Durant? Could you imagine what everyone would be saying?
They'll burn Brooklyn down, man. This place would go absolutely crazy. I think that I would eat so much crow. If this happened, by the way, I want it to happen. That would be the best scenario for everybody. They would have to shoot. I think that the path for them to do that, and as you were mentioning these other teams, the path for them to kind of make a run in the playoffs is that they do have such knockdown shooters that you can just run hot from three for 2 series. You can do it, or you don't even need to do it for 2 series. You can just run for 8 games basically through 15 games or whatever it ends up being. And they have the guys that can actually do that. I never mentioned Harris. You mentioned Harris is a great example. Harris, Prince, LeVert, Kyrie's obviously a knockdown shooter. If you get these guys rolling, so the thing about it is if they were a 6 or 7 seed, that would be a nightmare for those other teams above them because they could just roll through a couple games like this where we just make everything. And they have the kind of shooters that can do it. Even though Prince and Harris, these guys aren't necessarily household names. These guys are absolute knockdown 3-point shooters. And so you get enough of those looks through a series and that could be done. So I think it goes both ways. I think that they end up there. And I think that all the teams above them outside of, say, those 2 big ones, like the Bucks and maybe the Bucks, I don't know. They're a little bit different team than they were last year too, but specifically the Sixers because of all their size. I think that any other team would not want to run into them in the playoffs.
Yeah, what's your feelings about Kenny Atkinson as a coach?
Oh, he's great. And he's actually one of these guys too. It's really hard. Brett Brown kind of did this too, to last through the tank or through the lean years and still be considered like the guy going forward is really pretty tough. It is not often that happens. Usually in organizational turnarounds, you throw out the patsy for a few years and then you bring in the other guy, right? Or when you're ready to turn a corner, you bring in someone that actually is more into the X's and O's and less about the player development. Less about probably the difference between a coach that's going to get in your face or a coach that's just kind of has managed NBA players before, right? And so I think that Atkinson has really positioned himself to be both of those kind of guys, or to be the guy that can kind of be fiery and kind of speak his mind and everyone sort of respects him. So I think it's a real big testament to him. He's going to be with his team for a while, and I love him as a coach. I think he's just the kind of, especially again for this year, I think he's just the kind of guy that you want. And I think around the league, he has such cachet because of what he did with this team that was just kind of bad. Like, you got all these guys just overperform their expectation for multiple seasons. And if you can do that, I think he has a lot of respect. I love him as a coach. I think to be able to stick with the team through the lean years and then make it into the time when they have the actual good players and still be a respected coach is probably more difficult than most people think. He's handled it basically perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. I got a good vibe from him when I got a chance, like I said earlier, to sit down and talk with him. And I think that he's got him going in the right direction. And as you said, he went through that developmental stage where you're working on the player development piece of it and getting the guys better. And now you're at a point where, okay, now we have the talent. Let's transition into a winning culture. And I think that, between him and Sean Marks, they've been able to do that. It's been really, when you look at the aftermath of the Garnett-Pierce trade and what this franchise was to where they are now, I mean, it's really a remarkable transformation, the way things have changed. Doug, we can't
spend.
Kind of a miracle. Go ahead.
it's kind of a miracle.
It really is.
They took all these reclamation projects and turned them back into players. Like Joe Harris, like he was, I don't know, Cleveland wasn't grabbing after him, leaving town when he left there, right? Like
no,
D'Angelo Russell was a throw-in, so the Lakers could just get away from him and get off the Mozgov contract. Like, they took these guys that were just NBA afterthoughts and turned them into, like, Russell's gonna be a max player. Harris just went to play with Team USA. Like, this is like, it's kind of just a total miracle what they pulled off. And so I think from that point they have years of runway in terms of like good vibes from Brooklyn fans, sort of, no matter what way it works out at this point. But yeah, that's not what they ultimately want it to be. They want to win the championship. And I still think no matter what happens, you can't look at this situation as anything else but just a total, whatever word you want to use, grand slam, home run, slam dunk, whatever it is, right? Like, it was the very best you could ever have done with the situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's gone from an NBA backwater to one of the most intriguing situations in the entire league. And if we went back a year ago and we were having this same conversation, nobody would have in their right mind expected the Nets to be where they are today with two superstar players in the fold, plus sort of the unexpected development of the team and the roster as it was constructed last year. And now suddenly you're sitting there with the opportunity to have a good year again this year and the opportunity to do great things on down the line. So I think as a Brooklyn Nets fan and someone who covers the team, it's got to be exciting times to be able to do that. And Doug, we can't thank you enough for being a part of this NBA preview pod. It's been a lot of fun having you on. Maybe at some point as we get into the season, maybe before a Nets or Cavs game, we can jump back on and talk some Nets basketball, do a little check-in with you, or maybe just do a general survey of the league and talk a little bit about that. So thanks again for jumping on. We really appreciate it.
All right, man. Yeah, thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun to talk hoops all day. Hopefully we talk during the season. We talk a little Colin Sexton if you want to. But yeah, good luck to the Cavs this year. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
As you've listened to the Hoopheads podcast, one common topic that continually comes up in our conversations is character. I'm fortunate to be associated with the Positive Coaching Alliance, a national nonprofit movement that provides valuable tools, training, and resources for coaches, athletes, parents, and administrators that is centered around sports and educational psychology and organizational behavior research. PCA combines this research with practical advice from a national advisory board of top pro and college athletes and coaches who utilize PCA principles at the highest levels of competition. Through a partnership with our local Cleveland chapter of the PCA, we are pleased to offer a discount code to allow you, our listeners, to take a PCA online course for just $20. To take advantage of this offer, visit the store on positivecoach.org and enter the discount code HoopHeads20. That's HoopHeads20 with 2 capital H's. Coaches, I hope you'll take advantage of this great offer from the Positive Coaching Alliance and help us continue to grow the game. The New York Knicks with Marc and Jay from the New York Knicks Podcast.
Hi, welcome to this segment of the Hoopheads Podcast preview of the NBA season. I am happy to welcome Marc and Jay from the New York Knicks Podcast. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us. This is Marc. I'm from the New York Knicks Podcast, and Jay? This is Jay. I'm also from the New York Knicks podcast. I've never done this show with you before, but I feel like I know you well.
Well, I was going to say, so I want to express my very happiness and thankfulness that these guys decided to do this again. For whatever reason, our last podcast we recorded completely went out the window. So they have enjoyed or agreed to join me again and talk to us. So we're going to talk a little bit New York Knicks basketball. And sure, we've talked a little bit about this already, but at the same time, we're going to do it again. And maybe who knows where this is going to take us. So, guys, I want to thank you again for coming on again.
No problem. This is not the third time we've done this.
I know, right? So
I assume that you have got us on the show because in some weird way, you think the Cavaliers, this is the only team that's worse than the Cavaliers in your mind. I'm going to tell you, or what do you think?
I think they're pretty comparable. I think as we discuss, and I don't know how much, have the Knicks played a preseason game at this point? They've played one, right?
They beat the Wizards, and when you look at your roster and say it's comparable to the Knicks roster, I'm insulted.
Oh, really?
We have won 17 games last year, but I think we're very much improved. I think this team will. It won't take the NBA by storm, but it'll take the NBA by like drizzle. It'll be slightly better than last year and surprise some people. It's a better roster, whereas it was totally worth it selling your soul to LeBron James, and I would do it 100 times out of 100 times to get one of those seasons where you just lost in the finals, much less winning. But your franchise is done for a decade.
I don't know about a decade, but I do agree that they're done. I mean, I think I will say this now. I've watched one game, and it was I did watch the whole preseason game yesterday. I want to note that. Yeah. I watched the whole thing, and they had the Cavs wine and go scrimmage, which I don't really watch that, but that was tonight. But I watched the preseason game. We're taping this on Tuesday the 8th. They played some team. Now, luckily, I got to watch them play decent basketball before I got to watch the Browns absolutely lay a turd on Monday Night Football. But that's a discussion for another day. But anyways, so I watched the Cavs, and I actually liked what
Baker Mayfield want to play for the Cavs because that might be a better role.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. But anyways, what I will say is they looked like they were running an offense, which is something I can't say that the Cavs were doing at all last year. I know it was against a team, I think from Argentina, who was actually beating them halfway through the first quarter, like 18-12 or something like that. But I will say I think Beeline's gonna develop the kids, which I think is good, and I think they've got a chance to be good in the next 5 years. I don't think they're going to be any better, before then, to be honest with you. But just a question for you quickly. I know Kevin Love didn't have the best game last night for you guys. Will he be with a bunch of practice? Will he be ready to be injured all year? Well, I think he'll be as long if he can stay healthy. I think the Cavs are definitely way better than they were last year, because obviously he wasn't healthy much of the season last year, and I think he'll be ready. I know they didn't play him a lot of minutes last night. I think he only played like 14 minutes, and he took like 6 or 7 shots. But I think once again it's preseason. They're not going to go, oh, let's put him in there for 40 minutes and see what happens, or we're not going to put him in for 30 minutes. They put him in for 15. I would expect on Friday when we play that he'll play more minutes. I think 20. I think the other thing too is they weren't playing an NBA team, so I don't think it really behooves them to say, oh, let's put Kevin Love and play him 25 minutes tonight in a game that's not I know it's preseason and it's not going to matter anyways, but these are guys that are not NBA players. So that's why right. I don't think that they were like, oh, let's put him out there so he can get hurt.
When you say these guys are not NBA players, you mean your roster or their roster? Okay, I'm done. We go to talk about
both their roster and our roster.
Isn't it funny when I'm throwing I'm throwing bombs from my my glass house?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, how many? I mean, you've got a guy on your team that decided to hit someone in the top of the head with the ball and get ejected in the preseason. So
it's preseason. You gotta get that out of your system.
Yeah.
R.J. Barrett had an awesome third quarter last night. He played almost 40 minutes because that's what you want to do with your rookie, 19-year-old, play him almost 40 minutes on his first preseason game. That said, he looked pretty good last night.
Yeah, I would say, and that's the one thing I took away from the Cavs last night was Porter looked way better than Garland. And it's not.
I was just going to ask you how Garland looked because I didn't watch. I was curious how Garland looked.
Garland played okay. He didn't play a ton of minutes. I don't have them sitting in front of me, but I was impressed by Porter. He went 7 of 9 from the field and scored 16 points. He looked like the real deal. Now, obviously, that never was his issue. His issue is his off the course nonsense and how he can control himself. So that'll be the interesting piece on Porter.
But so going to the Knicks, I'm sure that's why you have us on here, not to.
Yeah, sorry, we don't need to talk about the Cavs anymore right now.
It was my fault, but so we won 17 games last year. We were a disaster. We've been a disaster for many years. I do think we're heading in some kind of right direction. Barrett is going to be better than people expect. I know there's, for whatever reason, it was like, okay, number 1 pick Zion will maybe be the greatest player of all time. Number 2 pick, he'll be pretty good. We get to the number 3 pick, the draft is over, and everyone sucks. Like, I don't know what the belief in that Barrett, because he was number 3, is somehow this, like, he's going to be a horrible NBA player.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be horrible. I don't know if he's going to be, he was number 1 recruit out of high school, right? If I'm not incorrect. Right. And obviously,
so like a year ago, he was considered the best player in this class. Obviously, Zion was now ahead of him, but he's very talented. He can do a lot of things. He can fill up the box score. I don't think he'll be as flashy or quite as exciting right away as a Zion. But they do say, like, he's one of those guys also that's very, like, he's humble, he's coachable, he's really hardworking.
Is he quiet? Like, is he quiet on the floor?
You said quiet. I was like, yeah, when he comes over for dinner, he never really talks.
No, but I'm saying, like, does he talk on the floor? Like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, so that's why I'm asking.
I don't think he's a giant talker, but I could be wrong about that.
Well,
I don't think he's a major talker.
He can grow into that, because I think, obviously, if you want him to be a great, I won't say generational talent, but if you want him to be a key piece in the cog, you definitely want him to become a better communicator on the floor, I would assume.
Right. I guess when you said talk, I thought you meant kind of a trash talker on the floor. But,
no, sorry.
He's not Marcus Morris, who's like going to talk the whole game.
Well, he might become Marcus Morris if he hangs out with them long enough.
Who knows? But Barrett, generally, I have high hopes. Knox, who did not necessarily have the best rookie year, historically may possibly one of the worst rookie years. I think he'll be a lot better this year also. I think the Knicks have a lot of young players who will develop. They have brought in a lot of the guys they brought in also are not like over-the-hill veterans. They're youngish veterans who could add a lot to this team. There's no clear path forward for this team, but I think we're going in the right direction, even though we're probably like crashing into other cars as we're going in that right direction.
All right, so I guess what's your main storyline when you're thinking about the Knicks, other than like how good is RJ Barrett going to be? What's the main storyline this year for the Knicks?
How will James Dolan embarrass us?
Oh, that's a good one.
No.
I like that one. Will he kick out Patrick Ewing out of a game that he attends in the season?
Will he somehow get Walt Clyde Frazier to never utter the word Knicks again because he's so frustrated with this franchise? I don't think so. I think the hopes for this year are Dolan is not part of the picture, in the sense of like you just don't hear much about Dolan because he's on the outside. He's at the games, but he's not being a fiasco or anything. The hope is really this season's all about teams going, oh, the Knicks are a little tougher than I expected. Oh, then those young players actually look pretty good. That's really the hope for the storyline, is that the young players are better than we expected, and that teams fights like it was never an easy. No team will come to the NBA, come here and go, oh, we're playing an MSG, it's going to be an easy win. Teams are going to come here and go, shoot, that's going to be a pretty tough game for us.
Jay, what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be development. I don't think the Knicks have aspirations of making any noise in the playoffs or anything. So it's going to be, let's look at the guys we got on the team. We got a lot of guys on rookie contracts, and do we have any keepers, and how do they fit together? And if any of these guys work out, then I guess it's a successful season.
All right. So obviously, we could talk a little bit. I want your guys' opinions. And I don't think we even talked about this the first time we talked, was the Porzingis trade. Were you guys a proponent of trading Porzingis, or were you not happy that they traded Porzingis?
If I could look back in 2020 hindsight from a couple of years from now, when I find out Porzingis was injured for the rest of his career, then I'll be totally a fan of this trade.
Yeah, I would say skeptically optimistic. I mean, he has been injured every season of his career, so we're not exactly like, oh my God, I can't believe we traded this guy, because we were definitely getting nervous once season 3 rolled around and he got injured yet again. Had a really bad injury. We don't know how. He looks good right now, but you never know.
Yeah.
He's definitely a guy that candidate for bad contract later on. Obviously, now he's on a much bigger deal.
You like a Tristan Thompson contract, perhaps?
I mean, I think he'll be better than that. But I just don't think he's going to fulfill the potential people expect him to. He doesn't stay healthy. He had a lot of like we saw some great Porzingis here, but he also had the tendency to do like ISO play. Defenders would adapt to him, and he didn't seem like he never in New York adapted to the adaptation. Like the defenders would come up on him. They put smaller defenders who were faster than him. He never really like found a way to like, I guess, adapt to how defense has changed on him.
Yeah.
But that also could have been he got injured pretty early, and maybe he would have eventually. But he went from last season from a really hot start to just kind of really falling off. Was it last season or the year before?
It had to be the year before. Who knows?
Yeah.
Every
Oh my
year.
God, stuff's been going
Well,
on.
the other thing you have to think about too is, and as we've already discussed, the roster situation. I don't really know did he have anyone on the roster with him as a Knick that would allow him to change the way that he played at all or adjust the defenses because he had any kind of help? Or was there anyone that would stick out in your head to say, oh, this guy here helped out Porzingis and that could have made him better?
No, I mean, the roster was pretty bad. So I understand him trying to play hero ball in this roster because there wasn't a lot around him. At the same time, I don't know. He never filled his potential in New York. He had a run before he got injured. He had a little run to start that year that was really great, but otherwise did not look as great leading up to the actual injury. He'll still have a very good NBA career if he stays healthy. He'll be a very good player. I just don't think he's going to ever be like a top 10 player in the league.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a frustrating trade. I understand in some ways why he'd want to move on. The team was a goddamn circus while he was here, and the Knicks basically turned their back on a number of really good players. I mean, Carmelo Anthony was like at one point lauded as like a hero coming here, and the Knicks fans and the organization really turned on him. Then they turned on Joakim Noah. They turned on Enes Kanter. They turned on a number of veterans where Porzingis probably looked at it and said, this organization treats its veterans very poorly. Why do I want to be part of this circus going forward? And a lot of it also was the carryover from the Phil Jackson. The Phil Jackson show here was a nightmare. We had a guy came in here we thought would be this amazing. He was an amazing coach. He was a terrible GM. And it really was hard to recover from that. And he got his Porzingis, but he also kind of lost his Porzingis because it was hard to recover from that.
Yeah, I think the one thing Porzingis has for him this year is he's got Doncic on his side now. And I think that could be huge. Obviously, both being European, too, it's going to kind of be interesting to see them play together. And just
he's in a great situation. You would think as good a situation as he could be in to succeed. So,
except for the fact that the Mavs are in the West, but that's a discussion.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and I'd say I hope things work out for him, but I don't because I'm a bitter Knicks fan.
Yeah. All right. So moving on from that, what are you guys feeling as the best case, worst case scenario? And you can take that in whichever order you would like for the Knicks this upcoming season.
Jay?
I would say worst case scenario is, I guess, just having the worst record and also getting screwed in the lottery. Right.
So 5 wins for the Knicks win 5 games this year and pick number 5.
Because then it's not fun to watch, and there's no reward for putting up with that.
Yep. Right. I don't think you're going to have 5 wins, though. I just want to be clear. You play the Cavs.
You don't think we'll get to that?
I think you're going to have – no, I'm saying I think you're going to have more than that. You do play the Cavs, and you play the Hornets, and you play the Wizards. I think the Hornets and the Wizards are going to be worse than both of our teams. I really don't think the Cavs are the worst team in the East. I think the Wizards are the worst team in the East. That's going to be my prediction. I don't know how bold of a prediction that is, but I think the Wizards are really, really bad. So
I think the Wizards are garbage. The Knicks just beat them in preseason, and I hope whoever you get on to do a Wizards preview will tell you that the Wizards are better than the Cavs. I think the Knicks probably win 30 games. Best case scenario, maybe 35 games. They look like a 30-win squad. They're definitely a lot better than they were last year, and they should win some games, but they're not really a playoff team either.
So what's the
I guess
go ahead.
Best case scenario could be sneaking into the playoffs. I mean, that's obviously a long stretch, but that 8th seed in the East is going to be not great.
Wouldn't the best case scenario be 82-0 and running the table in the playoffs?
Well,
You actually want best
we'll
case.
talk about realistic.
Okay, 81-1. My best case scenario is Mitchell Robinson ends up being a first teamer all defensive player, and Randall becomes an all-star, and RJ Barrett ends up winning Rookie of the Year over Zion. That's my best case scenario.
Your 82-0 thing maybe reminded me of something that I was listening to the Browns pregame show yesterday, and some guy called it and said the Browns were going to win 49-0, and the governor of California was going to ship the San Francisco Niners and ban them to the ocean. Well, we saw how that worked out. So.
Yes. So just like that, it'll work out well for the Knicks.
No. All right. So what's your guys' feeling on how the season is going to end up? We laid out the best case and the worst case scenario. Where do you think they will end up in the grand scheme of things?
I say 30 wins. What do you say, Jay?
I'm going to go 28, which will still be an 11-game improvement over last year. So.
I mean, anytime you win 10, 11 more games than the year before, it's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I want you to know, you guys, I have not laid out my prediction for the Cavs, but you guys have overed my prediction for how many wins the Cavs have. So if that's the case, then I think that you guys, the Knicks, are going to have a better record than the Cavs this year.
I would say worst case scenario, we have a worse record than the Cavs. Okay.
No, I think the worst case scenario is you have a worse record than the Wizards. I'm sorry. I'm piling on the Wizards right now, but.
The Wizards they do have Bradley Beal though. Bradley Beal's a hell of a player.
Listen, the problem is who else they have nothing else, right? I mean,
they don't have much else, but
I mean, Bradley Beal I know the Cavs probably don't have anyone that can guard Bradley Beal. I agree. But I'm just saying I don't see them. I mean, they might. I don't see the Wizards winning more than 18 games.
I mean, if Phil got a serious injury, they might not win for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that's
on a total side note, I looked just to see. I saw that the Mavericks are playing tonight, and Porzingis is not playing. Is Porzingis going to play in the preseason? Did he play already?
Yeah, he played the first one, I thought.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't.
I could be wrong. I'll be honest with you. I haven't been following that much preseason like basketball because it's a bunch of garbage. Anyways, it's kind of like preseason football. And
right.
You're just kind of, it's more or less to get their feet wet with these teams. And it is interesting this year because there's so many guys that are playing on new teams that it's definitely, it's kind of weird to like even think about Westbrook and Harden suiting up on the same team and things like that. But, and Paul George and obviously Paul George isn't playing, but Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. It's just going to be weird to watch. And I don't know how much of the Zion game you guys watched the other night, yesterday night, but oh boy, does he look good. And it just I don't watch a lot of preseason, and I have to say I've watched more preseason basketball this year than I have in years past because normally I'm like, what the heck am I going to do with preseason basketball?
Yeah, no. Zion is a must-watch. We are very bitter we didn't get him, but I think Barrett will end up being pretty good also.
Zion 2028. I don't know.
Is that what his weight will clock in at next season?
No, I was talking about for the Knicks, 2028. Like, I don't know.
That's all we. It's a goddamn joke how we pretend every free agent's going to come here. Apparently, Kevin Durant said on a radio show, it was either I guess it was yesterday maybe, that he never really even thought about coming to the Knicks, which is weird because there were a million rumors that he was coming here. And according to him, he said, I heard the rumors too, but I don't know why the rumors were there.
Didn't he say something along the lines of it was a joke? Like, it was a joke, or the Knicks were a joke of a franchise? Is that what he said?
He said the Knicks aren't cool.
Oh, that's what he said, okay.
Yeah, he just said, the Knicks aren't cool. No one really remembers them winning. They're not – there's nothing about – even though we pretend the Knicks are, this cool franchise everyone wants to play with, Durant and said all the younger players do not think that.
Yeah. So do you think that has anything to do with Dolan or not?
I think it has less to do with Dolan. I think it has more to do with winning. If you win, people care about you. If you don't win, it doesn't matter.
See,
Dolan owned the Golden State Warriors. You could do the exact same thing, but they'd be winning, and they'd be like, "Oh, I still want to play with Golden State. I don't care about Dolan."
I don't know about that though, because look at, I'm going to use my situation as a prime example. Like LeBron's first stint here, no one wanted to come here. No one. And he was obviously near that 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010 season. He was clearly the best player other than, I mean, it was an argument between him and Kobe Bryant at that point. Kobe was still putting up good numbers and not injuring himself all the time. But you have to make the argument that LeBron couldn't attract anyone to Cleveland. And I mean, Gilbert was always known to be a guy who, like, you know, sometimes Gilbert has loose lips and says things that he shouldn't say, but at the same time, he never held back paying, opening up the pocketbook if a situation presented itself. So I don't know if that's always the case. That maybe.
So if I remember correctly with the situation. First of all, he got a pretty good free agent. LeBron James came there and got you guys the 4 titles.
Well,
so Gilbert can't be that bad.
No. I was talking about but I was talking the first stint. Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember it wasn't so much the free agents. Like they never really had cap space because they just spent the cap space in really idiotic ways. They like brought like Larry Hughes in there who didn't work out. They brought in a bunch of players that did not work out. It wasn't so much free agents turning them down. It was that they never would have. They would just spend their money like in idiotic ways.
Yeah, I can see that point too. You know, and I think when they got Larry Hughes, the idea behind getting Larry Hughes was he had just had a great season and it made a lot of sense. But then it didn't pan out. And we've had Larry Hughes on the podcast, friend of the show. Hi, Larry Hughes.
Okay.
So.
It wasn't like it made some sense at the time. It just was like sometimes things don't work out. Also, I think they made a bunch of moves trying to get they also got screwed by Carlos Boozer. If Boozer just stayed there,
if he doesn't lie to a blind man, that's really terrible.
Right. He turned his back on the franchise. If Boozer had stayed there, you would have had Boozer and LeBron there, and that would have been like freaking amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. All right. So, is there anything else you guys want to talk about with New York Knicks before we wrap up?
No. We thanks for having us on. Hopefully, next time you have us on, we are no longer considered a joke of a franchise.
I'm okay with that. What do you think?
Yeah, so we'll be on in like 2034.
2028 when we sign Zion.
Or hey guys, I'm just throwing this out there. In like 4 years, Bronny Jr. Just saying, could be a possibility for you guys.
Is there any way we can draft like fetuses?
Okay, I'm not touching that one. I'm not touching that one. But anyways, I think you guys are definitely looking up, and I think I'm going to make a prediction here. In the next 3 years, you're back in the playoffs. I'm going to say that.
I think it's a pretty solid prediction, and I think that will come true. Thank you.
Hey, no problem. No problem. All right, well, we can't thank you guys enough again for hopping on, and we'll catch everyone on the next episode.
The Philadelphia 76ers with Jesse Larch from the Garbage into Gold podcast. All right, tonight we are welcoming to the NBA preview podcast on the Hoopheads Pod, Jesse Larch from the Garbage into Gold podcast to talk Philadelphia 76ers basketball. Jesse, welcome.
Mike, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on, dig into what is going to be the most gigantic team for sure in the league this year, maybe ever. But let's start with going back to last year. Just give us a quick recap of Philly's season. How it ended up, again, pushing the eventual champs to 7 games. There's got to be, I'm sure, in the city of Philadelphia, especially retrospectively, people going, man, if we would have won that series, could have been us hoisting the trophy.
There's definitely a bad taste left in your mouth for it ending the way that it did. It's hard to really point fingers or anything like that when a ball bounces 4 times on the rim before going through. And then watching them just, really just go right through the Bucks and right through the Warriors like a hot knife through butter. It's really hard to sit there at home and think about it like we were that close. We were just, like one gust of wind away from being that team. So it's definitely a tough pill to swallow, but, I think we're going to get into it here in a couple minutes, but what they did this offseason, it made up for all of it for me. I'm really excited about this season coming up.
So of the things that they did this offseason, which of the moves do you think are the most impactful, or which guy that they brought in do you think is going to have the biggest impact on what they can eventually do come next April when the playoffs roll around?
Well, so I've said it a lot on our podcast, Garbage into Gold. I'm ecstatic about bringing Al Horford into Philadelphia. We got to see him in Boston firsthand, with that rivalry going on, and really with Brad Stevens just getting the better of Brett Brown every time they met. And I've always maintained that a big reason for that was Al Horford and the little things that he did for Boston pick setting, defensive rotations. He always seems to get a timely bucket and a timely stop. And the biggest thing with bringing him into Philadelphia is he's going to be able to spell Joel Embiid, which, like, I don't know if you saw any of, like, the advanced stats with the Sixers Raptors series. And really,
right. It was like plus 101 when Embiid was on the floor and minus 99 when he was off, and the minutes difference was like ridiculous.
Game 7, he was only off the floor for like 6 minutes the whole game. That 6 minutes is literally where the game was lost. So to have a capable guy that can come in and play the 5 behind Embiid, that's the most important thing that they could have done this offseason. And to not only get a guy that is as savvy and as reliable as Al Horford is, but to take him from one of your direct rivals, I think that's such a big move for this team.
Yeah, it's a two-pronged win there. You bring him in and he brings all those intangibles and all the great things that he does, facilitating and being able to defend. And then, as you said, you take him away from the Celtics, which clearly weakens their prospects for getting out of the Eastern Conference this year. So I think it's a win both ways. How does Josh Richardson fit in with this team? Where do you see him contributing, and how do you think he fills that void of, Jimmy Butler headed to Miami?
So the way to think about the Jimmy Butler trade, at least the way I've been approaching it, is you didn't trade Jimmy Butler for Josh Richardson. You traded Jimmy Butler for Josh Richardson and Al Horford, because you're not getting the money to sign Al Horford without moving Butler off the books. So they got rid of Butler, and it really brings in the space to get Horford and Richardson, which I think makes the team better. Now, talking about Richardson, he's a young wing. He can shoot the ball. He loves to defend, which is definitely going to be the identity of this team this season. And he's the kind of guy who is versatile enough where he isn't dependent on one style of play, which makes him a perfect fit for guys like Embiid and Simmons and Tobias Harris, where he can just fill in the holes whatever they're not doing, he can be the guy to do it, whether it's slashing through the lane, sitting outside for, a pop-out shot. Josh Richardson's going to give this offense the versatility it was really missing. They're definitely going to miss JJ Redick this year. Just anyone that shoots like him, anyone would want that on their team. But Josh Richardson brings way more than just shooting, even if he doesn't shoot at the clip that Redick did. So now, one of the things I thought was a big problem last year was, and I don't know how much Sixers you got to watch, but it was a theme for the Sixers throughout the season, especially against the better teams in the league, that when games would get tight, teams would be able to set their offenses to attack JJ Redick. And they would do it at will, and the Sixers couldn't really afford to take him off the floor because they needed his shooting and his spacing. But now with Richardson, you can't exploit him that way. One of his strengths is defense. So suddenly, the team that was where the floodgates were at. Teams could just go right through JJ Redick, get points at will, and really keep the Sixers from catching up or from extending their leads. I think Josh Richardson solves that problem.
I think this team has the potential to be the number one defensive team in the league this year. You just look position by position, and Embiid, since he's come into the league, has been at or near the top of the Defensive Player of the Year voting. We know Ben Simmons is a good defender. Richardson's a good defender. We already talked about Al Horford and his ability to defend. Tobias Harris maybe is the weakest defender of the four. And, again, he's a 6'8" big body with long arms. I mean, this team has the potential to really be very, very difficult to score on, to say nothing of what they're going to be able to do offensively as well.
Yeah, and then even you look at the bench, they used a first-round pick on Matisse Thybulle, who throughout preseason, and yes, I know it's just preseason, but he has been a revelation. He's been way more developed offensively than I think anyone really anticipated. I'm not saying he's going to come in and be a great scorer immediately, but he's shown more at this stage than I was really expecting on offense. And his defense has been as advertised, if not better. And he was advertised as the best defender in that draft class. So he has come in and lived up to that completely. Really, he's already moved up the rotation where I thought he might be kind of battling for minutes as like a 10th or 11th guy coming off the bench. he's moved up to being one of the first guys off the bench here so far in preseason. And Brett Brown has said he's trying to put out what's going to be his regular rotations. So the indication there is that Matisse Thybulle's going to play this year.
What about Zaire Smith?
So Zaire, I think, still a bit more of a development project. The one thing people forget with him is his draft year. He was the youngest player in that draft by a pretty substantial margin. So there's still a lot of development going on with him. He definitely flashes. The athleticism's ridiculous, especially for, he stands, I think, like 6'3", but he plays more like this guy that's 6'6", just because of how he does have long arms, but he has so much bounce in him inside of his shoes that he really gets around the floor quick. He plays above the rim whenever he can. It's just putting together all those pieces and really still getting the NBA body to be able to handle that night in and night out. I'm not sure if you know that last year he had a food allergy that actually almost killed him. And
I did not know that.
So that's where he was last year. He got a food allergy, and he spent most of the year inside of a hospital. So when he came back at the end of the year last year, he was like, probably shouldn't have been back, honestly. He lost a substantial amount of weight, and he put it like all back on in a remarkably fast amount of time. So I would almost say this is more of his rookie year, and he was always viewed as a project, I thought, when they took him with that pick. When they traded out of the spot to get Mikal Bridges and Tig Zaire, they picked up that pick for the future more as an asset, and then they decided we're just going to shift our view a little bit longer. So I still like Zaire Smith, but I don't think he's going to be a big contributor this season. I'd love to be wrong on that, but I don't see him doing too much this year.
Well, the reality is probably that this team is going to go as far as Embiid and Simmons can take them. So let's check in with those two guys. Embiid obviously has come back in a lot better shape. He's got reformed his body. So where are Embiid and Simmons right now in their development in their game? Where are they? We saw Simmons knock down his first three and the crowd go crazy. So do you think that that's going to be something that is a novelty, or is he actually going to shoot 2 or 3 threes a game? What's your thought on that?
I'm still on the fence about that because I don't think Ben feels any pressure to shoot it. I think I think he's definitely been working on it, as he said, and really as we've kind of seen in the rogue, grainy cell phone videos that go across Twitter.
Yep.
But I think he definitely seems to have embraced that he needs to start developing the jumper. And part of it, I think, is being in the Philadelphia market that tends to be a little harsh about things like that, where, like you being based out of Cleveland, LeBron didn't really develop his shot until, year 4 or 5?
Yeah, I mean, he was. I mean, there was times where he would struggle with it for long stretches, where he definitely was not consistent with it. And even when he got much better with it, he would still have those stretches where you just say to yourself, why is he shooting the ball from out there? Why doesn't he just get to the rim every time? And I think that's sort of the way people look at Simmons, especially when they're younger and these guys are, 23, 24 years old. You're like, why don't they just get to the rim every single time? They're so much bigger, so much faster, so much more athletic. They have so much skill with the ball. But if you have both, if you have the ability to get to the rim and you can shoot that jumper, it just makes you that much more dangerous. And LeBron certainly developed that over the course of his career, where he got to the point where he was an effective enough shooter that guys had to respect him out there. And then that just opens up the floor for him to get to the rim.
And that's what I think Simmons needs, is just the respect. So once he hits a few, he might start getting that respect. And that's all he needs, because he does have that explosiveness to get to the rim. And I am not at all trying to say that Ben Simmons is equal to LeBron James, because that's way too heavy of a burden to really put on any player. But Ben Simmons definitely has some of the physical traits that LeBron had, and some of the skill set. He definitely parallels LeBron a little bit, as far as being a guy that can dominate inside and go to the rim at will. Now, I know myself and other Sixers fans would like to see Ben attack the rim a little more aggressively at times. I think his play style, he prefers to be the puppet master, He likes to be the guy with the ball in his hand and to distribute more so than be the guy to score all the points, which with Jimmy Butler leaving and with JJ Redick leaving, I think Ben's going to have to shoulder more of that scoring load. And aside from even the threes, I've definitely seen him in some of these preseason games try to make an effort to shoot, the 10, 15 footers a little bit more often than he did last year. So I think he's slowly trying to build his confidence with that. And Brett Brown even has some comments too that he's going to have to kind of try to draw up plays that force Ben to shoot. He talked about positioning Ben in the corner a little bit more often instead of putting him inside the paint and things like that that'll kind of encourage Ben to shoot. And I'd like to see the early stages of the season for Ben to work out the kinks and build his confidence in that shot. Even if he has, a few 0 for 5 nights, that's at least a sign of progress. Is then the only way you get better is by shooting that shot.
Yeah, you have to do it. I think there's no doubt that if you don't take those shots, you're just stunting your own development. I think this team is going to be good enough in the regular season in the East that they're going to be able to experiment and do different things with not only their lineups, but also with individual players, where I think, Simmons is, I'm guessing he's going to be encouraged to shoot the ball more by Brett Brown and take, whether it's those 10 to 15 footers or take more threes, whatever. But ultimately, if Philly's going to get where they want to go, which, I think this year the idea is we're legitimate. We're a legitimate title contender. Then Simmons is going to have to show that he can at least take those shots to try to get defenses to come out to spread them out. You want to be able to have, if he's your second best or your best player, you can't have him floating around in playoff games and not being involved in the offense simply because he can't shoot the ball. And I think if they can get there with him, then they really got something. Because as you said, no, he's not as good as LeBron, but you look at his athleticism, you look at his size, you look at his ability to handle the ball, you look at his passing, those skills are all there. And if he can just become even a slightly below league average shooter, whether that's just from the mid range or from three, that unlocks a whole nother piece of what his game can be.
Yeah, and that's something that my podcast partner Brandon's mentioned on our show a few times is without JJ Redick and without Jimmy Butler, who's really going to be those shooters? I think Tobias Harris will pick up some of that slack, but you don't really want to be counting on Al Horford and Joel Embiid as your 3-point shooters. And really off of the bench, there's not a clear-cut sharpshooter either. So that might be the problem for this team. But as we said earlier, I think the Sixers are going to have a lot of low-scoring games, or at least the opponents will be low-scoring. And with the length and the kind of things you can do with this lineup, I don't think scoring is going to be a problem. But it will be a problem if they find themselves down because, 3-pointers catch you up faster than a 2-pointer would. So in that sense, they might find themselves in trouble if they can't develop consistent outside shooting. But I'm confident that their defensive ability will make up for it. I could just see that going really badly, though.
I totally understand. What about where's Embiid at? What's the feeling there in Philly about where he stands going into this season? What do you expect from him?
I expect what we've been getting. I mean, he said he wants to play more games than he did last year. I think he played 63, 64 games, something like that. So he's shooting for a higher number. Given you probably seeing the Sixers on a national market more often, we get driven nuts when we watch Sixers games on national markets like TNT and things like that because they constantly talk about Embiid being on a minutes restriction and this, that, and the other with him. They were pushing that storyline like a year and a half after it had ended, after he was already done with minutes restrictions and everything else. So the national perception of Joel Embiid's injuries, I think, are a little bit overblown. As far as his fitness level goes, I think that's more a result of how his career is going. I don't think he was necessarily out of shape. Now, he did take steps to get more in shape, which you love to see. But if you look at Joel Embiid's history, he played less than a season at Kansas. And keep in mind, he also just started playing basketball when he was 16 years old, or maybe a little bit younger than that. But he played less than a year at Kansas, and then he goes to the NBA. He's injured his first 2 seasons, plays 30 games his first season. So really, he had never experienced a full season of basketball. And I think that's kind of where the fitness concerns came in. I don't think it was all these concerns about dieting and things like that. Like, yeah, you probably don't want to see, your star player eating a burger before a game. But at the same time, when your star player is 7'2" and almost, 280 pounds, 290 pounds, how much damage is a burger really doing to that body? When you have that much mass naturally, it's like, that's like probably, I'm trying to think of a good example, but that's like me eating something minuscule.
Right. Understood.
Like
Although I will say though, what I found interesting is at some point I ran across a basketball card from Embiid's rookie year, and then I looked at the guy that I saw last year at the end of the year in the playoffs, and you just looked at his body from like when he was a rookie, he was ripped. I mean, I would have liked to see what his body fat percentage was, and he looked like, again, last year he just looked heavier than what he did when he was a rookie. And again, guys get heavier as they get older and get more mature, but it didn't look to me like he had added more muscle. It looked like he had gotten himself maybe not in as good a shape. And so when you look at him this year in the preseason, he definitely looks like he's in better shape. And again, as guys mature and get older, I think they start to realize that they got to take some of those other things more seriously. I think about LeBron and just what he does and has done over the course of his career, how his outlook on taking care of his body changed as he got older and realized that, hey, I got to be out on the floor and take care of myself. And I think, I'm just guessing here, but I think Embiid is probably coming to that point where he starts saying, hey, I got to be in the best possible condition. And certainly we talked about it off the top where, you're one breath away from maybe winning an NBA title. And he obviously took that harder than anybody. And, there was all the storylines of him crying after the game and being upset. And so you wonder how much he took that frustration, that sadness, and took that with him, and that fueled him in the offseason to really get ready to come back with a vengeance this year. And so I think I'm looking for a huge year for Joel Embiid for sure.
I think he's definitely going to be primed for one. I want to see a little bit more balance. I don't want to see an Embiid heavy attack on offense, but I feel like that's probably how it's going to be. I think definitely early in the year you're going to hear that MVP chatter like we did this past season, where Embiid has crazy stat lines like averaging 30 and 15 a game through the first month. And then, like last year, again, it'll probably fizzle out. The team will get comfortable. They'll learn how to use Josh Richardson. They'll learn how to use Tobias Harris in a bit of a different role, which I also think Tobias Harris has been slept on by a lot of people. They're not even talking about him coming back to the Sixers. So when Jimmy Butler was there last year, he was essentially getting the touches that Tobias Harris was used to getting in LA and Orlando before that, in Detroit. So when you get rid of Jimmy Butler and now Tobias Harris gets those touches back, suddenly you have the guy that was scoring 25 points a game back in the lineup. That's how I view that, and I think they're going to ask Tobias Harris to be one of the key contributors points-wise. And I'm extremely excited for that because I don't think Sixers fans, or really anyone that watched Harris in a Sixers uniform last year, got to see what this guy can do. So I think we're going to get not only a motivated Harris, but we're going to get to see the full package and actually get to see everything he brings to the table, which is shot creation, perimeter shooting. He's a guy I loved and I was ecstatic to get, and I admit he was underwhelming, but I think he's going to have a much different turn in year 2 with the Sixers.
Yeah, his role is going to change a little bit. He rises up one spot, I think, in the pecking order and goes from, well, depending on how you put Redick on there, he might have been the 5th option last year. This year, I think you look at this team and he's probably the 3rd scoring option for this group. And I think that, as you said, may unlock some of the things that he showed, especially with the Clippers, where he was a borderline all-star and averaging over 20 a game. If he can bring that as he steps up into that third scoring role, I think that the Sixers are going to be in really good shape this year. What's your most intriguing storyline that you're going to watch for heading into this season?
So we talked about the defense. I definitely want to see that. I'm very curious about the bench because I think this might be the deepest bench we've had, at least in the Brett Brown era. So we got to see James Ennis and Mike Scott in their fits last season, and Mike Scott really, I mean, he really warmed to the city of Philadelphia, and the city of Philadelphia really warmed to him. He has a pretty substantial fan group that follows him around here in Philadelphia. James Ennis, I think, is another guy that really fits that identity that Mike Scott brings. And then they also bring in Kyle O'Quinn. So to me, that's three guys that all have that same mentality. They're very physical players. They're gritty guys. And you think of Philadelphia, you always think of that blue collar work ethic, that toughness. I think those are three guys that really embody that. And I love that the bench this year will actually have its own identity, I feel. I think they're going to come out there, they're going to be like a group of pit bulls and just attack and really pick up some slack that hadn't been getting picked up in years past, where TJ McConnell's a guy who people in Philadelphia will always speak highly of. Excellent teammate, always worked 110%, but he's admittedly a little lacking in the skill department. And then the other guys they'd roll out there with him were just underwhelming, where guys like Ennis and Scott and O'Quinn, and I'm assuming Trey Burke ends up winning the backup point guard job, that gives this team the best bench they've had in the last 5 years.
And those three guys all have size and are all good defensively and can do some things. So it kind of matches up with what they're doing with the starting unit. And to your point, and we talked about this earlier as well, when Embiid goes off the floor and you have a second unit, and now if Horford can get some minutes with that second unit, maybe you don't lose those Embiid minutes quite as handily, and that makes a huge, huge difference. Again, when you get up against some of the best teams and you're looking at, okay, who are we playing in the Eastern Conference playoffs? You get those matchups right. You get that second unit playing to their capabilities, and now maybe you can get Embiid some rest and not have the bottom drop out when you're playing in those competitive series at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you're not getting Embiid the rest, you at least have guys that can hold their own when they're out there, where at times the Sixers were forced to push Jonah Bolden into a spot he wasn't really ready for, or starting Greg Monroe in a playoff series against the Toronto Raptors. I mean, things like that aren't going to happen this year, where you can start Horford at the 5 or O'Quinn at the 5 if need be, and you can start Mike Scott at the 4 if Horford has to cover for Embiid. There's actual depth on this team this year, and that's going to be the most important thing for them, because they haven't had that. Before Butler and Harris out there last year, the team lived and died with Embiid. And then Ben Simmons continues his development, but it's still the same thing where they would live and they would die with the way Simmons or Embiid played. This year, I don't think that's necessarily the case. Yes, Embiid's going to push 70% of the action, 80% of the action. He's going to be the dominant player for the team, but they don't have to rely on him quite as much if things start to go south. And I think that's going to be a huge help for this team.
All right, so best case, worst case scenario for the Sixers. Lay it out for us.
Best case is they're going to win the title, and I think that's very realistic. Worst case would probably be a first or second round exit. But I can't imagine this team even missing the playoffs. If you're asking me personally, I would probably list them as the 1 seed in the East. I'm not too afraid of Milwaukee. I understand Giannis's freakishness and his athleticism and his ability, but I think that team lacks a little bit of completeness. And I think, especially with Malcolm Brogdon going,
losing Brogdon, I think is huge for them. I think he played a very important role, especially with the way Bledsoe kind of melted down in the playoffs. If you're Milwaukee, you got to feel very, very nervous about relying on Bledsoe come next May. He might have another great regular season, but you're still going to be crossing your fingers after what he did, after what he did in the playoffs this past year.
Yeah, and I mean, I really like Chris Middleton, but when Chris Middleton's your second best player, it's a little bit hard to take them too seriously. And we saw how easily Toronto dispatched them. I think the Sixers match up well with Milwaukee. I don't know offhand, but I know they won at least one against Milwaukee. They may have swept Milwaukee last year. And really, the way Brett Brown likes to play teams like that is he'll let Giannis run up the score. He'll let Giannis score 50, 60 points, and then the rest of the team won't do anything.
Yeah, so, I think it's going to come down to those two teams in the East. If I had to pick now, I think I would probably lean towards Philly probably at this point. I still think that Giannis is just, he's a singular, spectacular talent. But I think Philly's roster, especially with the depth they've added, is probably better. And if Simmons and Embiid can reach and play to their potential, I think Philly has the kind of team that can give Milwaukee a lot of trouble. They're both teams are big. I think Philly's just going to be better defensively and maybe more versatile on the offensive end. So give us what do you think their regular season record is going to be? And then do you think they can win? Do you think they can win the title? Are you predicting that they can win a title?
I am predicting that they're winning the title this year. And I mean, yeah, it's a little bit of homerism, but I genuinely feel that there's not going to be too much resistance through the East for them. And I look at the West contenders, and I like the way they match up. Historically, when Embiid's played Anthony Davis, Embiid's gotten the better of him. And then when I look at the Clippers, their roster is obviously honestly, if there's a roster better than the Sixers, it's probably the Clippers. But I look at them inside the paint, which is where the Sixers are going to be living, especially with Simmons, Horford, and Embiid. And I don't see really anything that can stop Embiid, Horford, and Simmons when it comes down to that type of game. I love Montrezl Harrell. He's probably one of like my guilty pleasure players. I really like the way he plays the game. But the reality is he's 6'9", and he doesn't match up well with a guy like Embiid or even a guy like Horford. So I don't love that matchup for the Clippers. I think the Sixers, the size you mentioned, I think is going to be a difference maker. And I really think that the more this team gets together, the more like it's almost unlimited potential with that lineup and that starting five. So I'm curious to see what happens there. I mean, Kawhi Leonard after last year, I don't want to bet against him. But, we just saw Paul George kind of struggle to make a marriage happen with Russell Westbrook. And if you're asking my opinion, I would blame Russell Westbrook more than Paul George. But that's personal bias, because I personally am not a fan of Russell Westbrook. I'm not saying he's not a good player. I just don't. I don't like the guy's attitude or personality on the court. I think he's a bit of a me first player, and I think that's part of what led to him and Paul George not working out.
Well, that'll be an interesting pairing, Harden and Westbrook. I've been on record on our show of not being a huge fan of Harden, and just the fact that it seems like in big moments he doesn't necessarily step up and come through. And the Rockets' offense, if you can call it that, seems to work pretty well in the regular season, and then in the playoffs, when they need to come through, Harden dribbling 47 times and then shooting a step back jumper, that gets a little bit predictable. So I think Westbrook adds a little bit of unpredictability to him, but I know exactly what you're saying. I think that those two guys, they're not a perfect match, and I think it'll be interesting. That's probably one of the things that this season is just going to be the most interesting, to see how those two guys mesh and what it looks like. And the reality is we won't know what it means until the playoffs, because I'm guessing they're going to have a good regular season because both of those guys are super talented, and on a night-to-night basis, they're going to be tough to deal with. But I think when you get down to a playoff series, that teams are going to be able to figure out how to defend those two guys, whereas Philly, I think, has a lot of versatility. And I just think Philly's going to be a monster defensively, and that's going to give them every opportunity to get out of the East and give themselves a chance against one of those Western Conference teams for sure.
Yeah, and we even saw that Ben Simmons nobody can shut down Kawhi, but Ben Simmons didn't do a bad job of limiting him and forcing him to move the ball. And I think, I don't think Ben Simmons gets enough credit for his defensive ability. I would categorize him as elite defensively, and that's just me getting to watch him every night. But if you see him matched up with these, when he plays a Russell Westbrook or he plays those types of guys, generally he puts them in his pocket for most of the game. So I think this year especially he'll develop that a little bit further. And we mentioned Horford, Embiid, and Richardson behind him, and Harris at worst is an average defender. So you put that together, it's going to be very imposing for other teams. You asked for like a win-loss prediction. I think they might get to 60 wins this year. They have back-to-back 50-win seasons. I think there's going to be growing pains early in the year, and I'm sure injuries will strike at some point in the middle of the season that'll force them through a little bit of a spell. But I think they can win 60 games this season.
Well, if they get to 60 and they end up winning an NBA title, that'll be a great story coming off that disappointing ending last year. And if they do get it done, Simmons and Embiid are awful young, and clearly that will answer all the questions of whether or not these two guys are a long-term fit on the court. And I think they're going to figure it out. I think they're both smart guys who understand how they need each other, and that this year is going to be the year that they're really going to take off. And I won't be surprised at all if they end up winning the title coming out of the East this year. Jesse, we can't thank you enough for being a part of the preview pod with us tonight.
Yeah, no problem.
The Toronto Raptors with JD Bunkis from SportsNet. Happy to be joined on the Hoopheads Pod NBA preview show by JD Bunkis, who covers the Toronto Raptors for SportsNet, Canada's #1 sports network. JD, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be on with you guys. How you doing?
We're doing great. Thanks for being a part of our Hoopheads NBA preview podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about the Raptors tonight. Let's start out by looking back at what was, by any statistical measure, a historic season for the Raptors. So talk a little bit about how special last year was, and just you having an opportunity to cover the team, and just how the city embraced what ended up being a championship team.
Well, I don't know when you guys are going to run this, but today was the anniversary of when Kawhi Leonard had his first media day conference, where he met with everybody, and there was all this hand wringing, like, does this dude even want to be here? Did they give up too much? People were freaking out in Toronto because DeMar DeRozan wanted to be here. And that's what really used to matter the most. Like, if you liked Toronto and you were willing to be a Raptor, because the franchise had been burned by, Chris Bosh and Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady and Damon Stoudemire. None of those guys really want to be here. And here was our guy. Here was the dude who actually bought into DeMar DeRozan. And he gets shipped out the door. And Dwayne Casey gets the axe, the most successful coach in Raptors franchise history. And all of a sudden, here's this guy, this mercurial star who no one really knows a lot about as to why things fell apart with San Antonio, a winning organization. And Toronto's going to roll the dice on this guy. And I think people started off very hesitant. And basically right out of the gate, watching him play, it was just so obvious what kind of a player he was. Like, all the injury concerns that came with Kawhi Leonard, like, what's he going to be like? Is his leg going to be the same? Can he fit with Kyle Lowry? How's he going to fit in with these guys? Like, they just disappeared overnight. He was a true blue superstar. And the vast majority of the year was just really enjoying the ride, was watching Pascal Siakam come into his own, was watching Kyle Lowry assimilate with Kawhi Leonard. It was watching an exciting trade deadline that brought in Marc Gasol, who, lived up to everything we wanted him to be. And then this fantastic playoff run that really united a country. It's just so unique here. It's a little bit different from the States, and it's different from anything else I've ever seen because, there's big cities, right? And I can imagine that you guys in Cleveland felt like your whole state was behind the Cavaliers, and how overwhelming that probably meant there just to finally win a championship. And it's like that, but it was legitimately for an entire country where hockey has always been first, that people are going out in the streets and they're having these massive watch parties and, getting together with friends and family and community members to watch on big screen televisions as the Raptors go on this ride. And so it happened like such a blur, but it was just this massive, massive supernova that ends with Kawhi Leonard leaving. But it left an impact on this country in a sport, in a way that is probably going to alter sports here forever.
I can imagine. Was there a moment where people really believed that they could win the title? Because I have to believe, sort of with the Raptors' checkered playoff past, that even heading into the playoffs, there was doubt, despite the fact that the team had coalesced really nicely around Kawhi, and it was clear that whether he wanted to be there long-term or not, he clearly wanted to play hard and compete to the best of his ability during that particular season. So was there a point where people started to say, hey, we really got a chance to win this thing? Can you point to one moment in the postseason where that kind of turned and people really thought, hey, this could happen?
Well, first of all, the city of Cleveland, their basketball team gave this city basketball PTSD. It was
Absolutely.
like
No doubt about
LeBron.
that.
Do you know the shirts that they had, the LeBron toe shirts? Did you ever see those or no?
No, we don't know about LeBronto. No, we lived LeBronto. It was our nightmare. Mark Jones doing us dirty like that when he was a Canadian too. Like, that's just not right. It wasn't right, Mark Jones. You didn't need to say it like that. It was before LeBronto started with to me, LeBron just having a good time, pretending to drink a beer in the stands, like spinning the ball on his finger in front of Serge Ibaka's face, and then just getting buckets. Him just OG Anunoby hitting this massive shot, and us thinking like, oh man, maybe the Raptors all of a sudden get a chance, and then LeBron doesn't get picked up, and he just drains a beautiful shot. He was just, again, if you want to rank the all-time Toronto killers and just the reason why Raptors fans were shells of themselves going into this past year, it's like LeBron in Cleveland and all the ass whoopings that got put down. Just as a quick side tangent, the saddest moment for me was when the Raptors tied it up 2-2, the first matchup between the Cavs and the Raptors. And Toronto was like just on fire. They couldn't believe that they tied this series up. Bismack Biyombo had this incredible game. He had over 20 rebounds. He was like kind of slowing down LeBron. And everyone here was like, maybe they have a chance. And we had a bunch of people go to Cleveland to watch that game 5. And if you remember that game,
I was at that game.
Right. Kyrie like throws the ball off the backboard and LeBron hammers it down. And it's like 20-0 basically out of the gate. And they're doing on Canadian television like pan shots of different Raptors fans just like slunk in their seats. And they've got the We the North flags like basically over their faces. Like, what a nightmare for any of those people that went there. It was just horrible. But yeah, man, I don't think people really believed because that was the mantra going into the entire season was, hey, let's see what happens in the playoffs because they've been such a good regular season team year over year. And I think that the real buy-in happened in the Philadelphia series when Kawhi just started to take over ball games, like where he just was unequivocally the best player on the floor, and he was putting together a stretch that was, people were saying it, and it ended up being right, but like Michael Jordan-esque, where it was just he's this one-man wrecking crew, and no one around him is even helping, and he's just lifting this team up and dominating. And that's what you remembered, again, about seeing LeBron beat the Raptors. It was, well, look at how bad the supporting cast is around LeBron this year. It's like, who cares? LeBron. And finally, Toronto had that ace in the hole, and you got to see it up against other superstars like Joel Embiid and Jimmy Butler, who, again, was a Raptors killer. So I think that was really the moment of buy-in was the Philly series. And then it got like, it used to always be get to the finals because Golden State was always fait accompli. But then once KD got hurt, it was, holy crap, like they could win this thing. Like this could actually happen.
Yeah, it's an amazing feeling when it goes from being something that is way out there in the universe that, hey, maybe someday we could win it, or yeah, we have a team that's going to be in the finals. But to your point, when you really break it down and suddenly Durant goes down with the injury, the Raptors are really playing well, and now that championship is right there in front of you. I know that's how we felt certainly in 2016. You were down 3-1, Draymond gets suspended, and all of a sudden, bang, you're right back in the series, and you're like, oh my gosh, we really honestly have a chance to be able to win this thing. And that feeling is just, it's amazing. And I'm sure that the city, with just all the trials and tribulations that you described earlier, to be able to get yourself into that position is just an incredible, incredible opportunity. And obviously the Raptors took advantage of what happened to Golden State, and rightly so. And that's, you can look back at every championship that's ever been won in the league and find different things that happened that allowed that team that ended up winning it to win it, whether it was good health luck on their side or injuries on the other side or somebody changing teams and, getting picked up at the trade deadline. There's always things that happen. And the Raptors were certainly, there was a great case there for being in the right place at the right time with the right team. And it ended up leading to the first championship in the history of the franchise. And I know that for us here in Cleveland, I've told people that I never thought we'd get any of them. I never thought I'd get one in my entire lifetime. So the fact that I got one was pretty incredible. And so I'm sure the feeling is the same in Toronto, despite the fact that now Kawhi is gone. So as we look into the future, now that we've looked at the past, what is the biggest storyline heading into this season? Obviously, it's trying to figure out how do we replace Kawhi.
but what does it look like going into training camp this year? What's kind of the talk and the buzz around the team?
I think it's two-parter. One is that Kyle Lowry has now become unequivocally the best player in franchise history. Like, now that he has a ring, and you just look at the longevity and everything that he's put together as a Toronto Raptor. Like, clearly Kawhi is the best player to have ever played for the Toronto Raptors, and that run, starts and ends with him. But Kyle Lowry, if you just look at all the numbers and everything that he's meant to this city, he's become a Toronto Raptor. Like, he just buried his own Philadelphia 76ers and put, the ghosts of Toronto kind of in the past of the first time they met Philly in a Game 7. And so I think one is, what's this going to be like for Kyle Lowry, who's an unrestricted free agent, going into this year and not having the certainty of a long-term contract in front of him? Because he's an older player and he's a smaller player, and he's a guy that, has historically difficulty keeping the weight off. And so I think there's a lot of people with eyeballs on what's going to happen with Kyle and how is his career going to end, because I think Toronto would really like to at least have one guy who retires with the franchise and finishes on like super amicable terms that they can point to and say, that's the first jersey that goes up in the rafters. And two is the progression of Pascal Siakam, because he was the most improved player of the year last year. And he was awesome for long stretches. Like, the games that Kawhi Leonard would not play during his load management, Pascal Siakam legitimately looked like an all-star. And he improved almost in a way that I haven't seen a most improved player go as a forward who was this, rangy defense first guy to someone who all of a sudden had a bunch of offense and then was also, just one of the league's better defenders at his position who could run the floor better than any forward. And I think people are curious to see, like, what's the cap on this guy? What's the ceiling on this guy? Can he be the guy on an NBA franchise, or is he just a good player on a great team? And so I think those are the main two things, is Pascal and Kyle Lowry.
What does your gut tell you about Siakam? Do you think he can get there where he can be the number one guy on, let's say, a conference final team, or do you think he's always going to have to be a complimentary player? Do you think he can get to that ceiling that you were describing?
I don't think he's ever going to be, one of the 12 players in the league that matter, right? This is a league of superstars. Like, we just talked about it with Kawhi. It's like, and with LeBron, it's like, when you have one of those guys, and that really changes your title ceiling. So I don't think I'm delusional in the sense of, well, maybe Pascal Siakam can, continue to evolve and he could be our Giannis Antetokounmpo. It's like, nah, that's not going to happen. But what I do think is, if he can add a little bit of a threat off the dribble, like if he all of a sudden extends his range even out to like the elbow, and he can make you respect his jump shot, I think he becomes a legitimate all-star. Like, I think he becomes like one of the best 25 players in the NBA, and someone who, when other franchise guys look around the league and try to assess what situation they might want to be in the future, they say, man, if I join Pascal Siakam, he's going to guard the other team's best player every game. He's a facilitator. He's not someone who needs the ball, but if we need to get a bucket, he's a great number two. Like, he's already proven he can be a number two on a championship winning team. And what happens if he even gets better? He becomes this real ace in the hole as like an attractive piece for someone who might want to come to Toronto in, 2021 when it's that next big free agent class. So I think that's my gut on Siakam, is that he can do that. He can get that little jump shot, which makes him a little bit more difficult to defend, because he really struggles against bigs who take away the hole, like Giannis did and like Joel did in the playoffs. And so that's it for him, is I think he can become a little bit better of a shooter, and I think his ceiling can be, a top 25 guy in the league.
Yeah, I think his defense is what really gives him the opportunity to do that, because he's probably never going to be a super elite offensive player like you're describing, but the fact that he's an elite defender gives him an opportunity, I think you're right, to be able to end up being a top 25 player if he can get to his potential. So let's go best case, worst case scenario for the Raptors. What's the best case scenario for their season this year? And then flip it around and give us what you think the worst case is.
I think the best case scenario is Siakam takes another step. OG Anunoby, who had a bit of a sophomore slump season with injuries and who, only a year ago was kind of perceived as Toronto's number one young player, that he continues to progress, and that they're able to kind of strike gold with one of their diamonds in the rough. They grabbed a guy named Terrence Davis, who was an undrafted free agent, who they liked out of college, who was a senior and who could have been drafted, but chose down that opportunity to pursue real money. They still have Fred VanVleet. They signed Rondae Hollis Jefferson. they accumulate guys who are maybe pieces. And the one thing that the franchise has done extremely well lately under Masai Ujiri is hit on these unknown guys, right? Whether it's like Norm Powell, who was a second round pick, or Fred VanVleet, who was undrafted, or Siakam, who was the 27th pick in the draft. They do a really good job at developing guys and figuring out what they do well and putting them in a position to succeed. And so I think that's what you want to see from Toronto. They're not going to win a championship. They're probably not even going to win a playoff round, definitely, or more likely than not, 2 playoff rounds. And so what you want to see is progression from your young players, your pieces around the fringes, because I think that they want to continue to try to sell themselves as a real organization that is not ever going to tank, is going to have sustainable winning, is going to put good pieces around great players and remain attractive for, that next opportunity they get, whether it's through a trade or free agency, to bring in another star.
I think Masai Ujiri is probably one of their best selling points as a franchise when it comes to what you just described, which is selling themselves to free agents. I mean, obviously the city is a great city. There's still, I think, that stigma among some NBA players of it's in Canada, it's in a different country. It's cold. Yeah. You have the cold weather. You have you're not on one of the coasts. It's not necessarily one of the glamour cities that you hear about. But I think the reputation that Masai Ujiri has built throughout the league is something that I think when he sits down with players, he has a ton of credibility with guys to at least be able to have a talk with them and at least get them to seriously consider coming to Toronto, provided that those other pieces like you described are in place.
Well, yeah, especially once you've actually done it, right?
For
like
sure.
It's one thing to say, hey, maybe you could be the one who changes things. And guys are like, yeah, I don't really need to maybe try to be the pioneer here. But Masai Ujiri has now proven his track record of being an NBA champion. And I think that just adds a ton of weight when he does get those meetings with guys. Like, man, Toronto Raptors in a short period of time. And this is why, so I do a radio show and I have a guy on from Cleveland quite often. I don't know if you know Ken Carmen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 92.3.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyways, he and I talk from time to time, and he's a really good guy, and I really enjoy, getting his opinions. But there's a real kinship, I feel, at times between Cleveland and Toronto, just as this, 2 cities that, from a sporting standpoint, had been kind of a laughingstock for a really long time. It's why I feel bad for the Browns right now. It's like, oh, man, you're finally supposed to get this moment. Now everyone just loves to kick you while you're down. And that's kind of what it's been for Toronto as well for a really long time. They were the purple dinosaur franchise that couldn't even get a meeting with LaMarcus Aldridge. LaMarcus Aldridge wouldn't even talk to the Raptors, not even for a 5-minute courtesy meeting. Masai Ujiri had to wait outside of his hotel. And essentially, you've probably felt it in that city too. It's just what winning does in terms of being able to sell your city and sell a vision and change the optics of, what your fan bases can buy into from the bottom up. It's monumental. And so, yeah, I've always believed in Masai Ujiri. He's just this incredible guy with an incredible story who has work ethic that is incomprehensible for someone like me who gets tired after doing a radio show. And he's like, yeah, I won the championship. Now I gotta beat it because I gotta get to my daughter's graduation before I go to Africa and run my basketball camps in my nation for all summer long and try to uplift my country through sport. See you later. It's okay, Masai, do your thing, bro. I'll be here having a nap. So yeah, man, he's probably, they lose Masai Ujiri, they lose their identity. He has become the Toronto Raptors in the absence of Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to describe it. Let's go to your personal outlook for the Raptors season here in 2019, 2020. Come next April, what do you see their final regular season record being, and then where do you see them going if they're going to make the postseason? What do you see them being able to do in the playoffs next spring?
I think they're too good to miss the playoffs. I think continuity matters, and I think they're going to have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that with Kawhi leaving, that they're not going to want to have this thing be an embarrassment. And again, they have still Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, Kyle Lowry, Pascal Siakam, Norm Powell, Fred VanVleet. They're not going to be a train wreck of a basketball team. And I think Nick Nurse is actually a pretty damn good basketball coach. So they'll be good. They'll be a middling team. They'll probably be fighting around, hoping for a first round playoff matchup. I think a 4 seed would be a real success from a regular season standpoint. And then maybe win a playoff round, but then probably get out talented by, a Boston or a Philly or Milwaukee and maybe even the Pacers. Honestly, I look at all those teams and I say they, on paper, to me, look better. I think they're going to be right around the middle of the pack with the Orlandos of the world. That's where they're going to be. But what I really think is going to be the vibe of the season is people are not going to care as much about wins and losses. Like, when guys have retirement tours, like D Wade last year, where like every city he goes to and every game is like a celebration of D Wade.
Feel the love.
Yeah, like I think it's basically going to be the Raptors retirement tour kind of thing, where it's like, hey, we won the championship, so like celebrate the team, and like Kyle might not be here, and Gasol might not be here, and Serge might not be here, so like let's all go out and watch the Raptors like exchange jerseys with people, kind of thing. Like the wins are almost going to be secondary to the like afterglow of winning a championship, and I don't know, I just like that's how it feels right now.
I have some good news for you. I think Toronto's better than Boston. I just watched 4 of the Boston players play in the Team USA, and they look terrible. So I'm just telling you, I think Toronto's got a chance to be better than Boston this year. That's what I'm going to say.
I think they have a chance. Are we really all the way out on Jason Tatum like being top 15 guy in the league? Like that just seemed to change really quick from a guy who had to play with Kyrie Irving. And like how ugly that locker room got last year. I feel like him just being gone is going to open things up for Tatum, and then we're like, oh right, this guy's supposed to be one of the better scorers in the league, and like he's going to be fine.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I think there's a clear in the East. We've talked about it, but I think there's a clear top 2. I think Milwaukee and Philly, clearly from a talent standpoint and from what you see on paper, are clearly going to be the top 2, barring injury or some crazy chemistry problem that one of those 2 teams develops. And then everybody else, I think you could throw 5 or 6 teams in a hat, and it wouldn't be outlandish to say that one of those teams could finish 3rd and one of those teams could finish 7th. And I think I'd put Toronto into that mix with Boston and Indiana, and you could probably throw Brooklyn in there depending on how the Kyrie chemistry experiment goes. And maybe Orlando. I think Orlando, talking about continuity, they bring back their entire roster that finished the regular season at 22-9 or something over their last 31 games or so. So I think there's some, that middle pack of the East should be interesting to see how that all plays out. And then I think as far as the playoffs, it'll probably come down to who matches up with who and who has the home court, and like it typically does year in, year out. But I think Milwaukee and Philly would be stunned if one of those 2 teams doesn't end up at the top of the heap in the East.
Yeah, I think they're the best 2 as well. And like the only reason I think Toronto could have a better regular season than Boston, and I think they could have a better regular season than Indy. And yeah, they're like in that group like you guys are talking about. I guess what I have a tough time picturing is when it's a playoff matchup next year and it's, going down to those last final possessions. If Toronto was playing Boston and, Toronto's got to get a stop against Tatum or Kemba Walker. And then the other way around, it's like, who's taking that final shot for the Raptors next year? Like, is it Pascal Siakam? Because, again, last year, they were able to game plan for him in the postseason. Like, you take away the rim from him, and he's pretty limited. Like, Kyle Lowry at 34 years old, like, he's got to be the one who takes big shots in crunch time in a playoff game after, like, the grinds of a regular season. It's hard for me to envision who the Raptors guy is next year in those big moments, in those big games.
Do you think there's any chance that Lowry's not on the team by the end of the season with his expiring contract, or no?
Oh, I think there's definitely a chance, because I think that I don't think it's going to be a situation where Masai Ujiri just trades him callously, like out of the blue. Like it would have to be something where it's just this undeniable package from a team. But the only way I really see it going down is if the Raptors kind of sneaky stink and Kyle's only got so many years left on the resume. I think that dude cares about making the Hall of Fame. Like, I think that dude cares about, finishing his season with some success. Like, there's a reason why that guy was, like, trying to go to Team USA despite, struggling through a thumb injury. He wants to be on an Olympic team. He wants to add another Olympic gold to his resume, have 2 Olympic golds and a championship, right? Like, I think that puts you in tough to keep you out of the Hall of Fame conversation. So if Kyle Lowry looks at it and says he wants to compete somewhere else next year and he wants to go, like, ring chase with someone and there's an opportunity for him, I think that Masai Ujiri would try to make that happen. But otherwise, I don't think the value is going to be there. Like, who's going to look at Kyle Lowry and say, we'll give you a first-round pick for him? I don't know. I don't see it going down like that. So there's a chance, but I don't think it's as great of a chance as it was before. And also there's the Chris Paul wild card, right? Like, if a franchise wants to go get a point guard, there's also Chris Paul, and they might be willing to give him up just to take the money off the books. So yeah, it's tough for me to envision how that trade works.
It's going to be an interesting season in Toronto for sure. I think that the transition from Kawhi to the post-Kawhi era here with basically, again, the same roster that is coming back that won the title. I think you said it best when you said they're going to play with a chip on their shoulder, and it'll be interesting to see which way that chip pushes them. Is it going to push them where it's going to inspire them to go to greater heights, or is that chip going to kind of beat them down and they're going to get frustrated where, man, last year we were a title contender and now this year we're just kind of scraping by, in the middle of the pack. And so it'll be interesting to see which way it goes. JD, we can't thank you enough for jumping on the Hoopheads Podcast NBA preview with us. It's a pleasure having you on. Hopefully as the season goes on, we'll get a chance to maybe touch base again and talk some Cavs and Raptors hoops as we move forward. So thanks for jumping on with us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Hoopheads Podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.